Midnight. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I'm your storyteller for tonight, here to share a tale that might just keep you up a little longer than you'd like. But don't worry, you can always go back to sleep after this, or maybe you'll wish you hadn't. Before we begin, go ahead and like the video, subscribe, and let me know where you're from. What time is it in your part of the world? Get comfortable, and let's dive into the dark unknown. 019. The highway stretched ahead like a dark, hungry tongue, swallowing up the dim stars in its wake. Route 49 had always been a desolate place, its long, empty miles never really inviting anyone to linger, especially not in the dead of night. But tonight it felt different. The air seemed thicker, charged with an unseen presence. It pressed against the windshield, as if urging me forward into the night, beckoning me to follow. I had been driving for hours, desperately trying to outrun the oppressive silence of my apartment. The city had become a labyrinth of buzzing lights and hollow sounds, each day blending into the next. My doctor's latest prescription, an unspoken surrender to exhaustion, remained untouched in the cabinet. Just drive, I had told myself. Clear your head. The radio had been dead for over an hour now, leaving me alone with the monotony of my tires humming against the road. The fuel gauge was creeping dangerously low, just above a quarter tank. I had enough to get to the next town, if I could find it. But I wasn't sure what I was looking for anymore. Then, I saw it. 131. It came into view like a shadow at the edge of my vision, a perfect strip of asphalt, gleaming faintly in the headlights. Not a regular off-ramp, nor a merging lane, but something entirely different. It ran parallel to the main highway, untouched, unmarked, leading off into a void that could only be described as unnatural. The scrub grass and weeds around it seemed to recoil, as though unwilling to touch it. The road had no signs, no markings, nothing. I slowed down, my foot easing off the gas, drawn to the anomaly. Through the passenger window, I could see the smooth, pristine surface of the road, untouched by time or wear. The main highway, by contrast, looked like it had been carved out of years of neglect, cracked shoulders, faded paint, the occasional pothole, its surface patched and scarred. Yet this lane, this strange parallel road, appeared untouched, perfect, as though it had just been laid down. 152. My curiosity, tinged with unease, overcame me, and I pulled over, the tires crunching against the gravel as I came to a halt. The air outside was thick with stillness. There was no sound, no wind, no rustling of trees. Nothing. I stepped out of the car, and as I did, a sudden chill ran down my spine. It wasn't just the cold of the night, it was something else, something I couldn't explain. The lane beckoned, its smooth black surface almost gleaming in the moonlight, leading into the unknown. I took a step toward it, my feet moving almost of their own accord. As I crossed the edge of the road, I looked back at my car, wondering if I should turn around. But something inside me, a whisper in the back of my mind, insisted I keep going. With every step I took, the silence grew deeper, more suffocating. My breath came out in clouds of vapor, even though the night wasn't that cold. I could hear the faintest echoes of footsteps, but when I looked around, I saw nothing, only the desolate expanse of this road, stretching endlessly ahead. I reached the center of the lane, and that's when I saw it. 217. A figure, standing at the far end of the road. A silhouette in the distance, barely visible but unmistakably there. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the shadows, my mind playing games with me. But then, it moved. Slowly. The figure was tall, almost unnaturally so. Its outline was blurred, shifting in and out of focus, as though the very air around it was bending. My heart began to race, my instincts screaming at me to turn back, to get in the car and drive away. But I was frozen, my feet glued to the ground. The figure raised its hand, and for a moment, I thought it was beckoning me. But no, there was something darker in its motion, something wrong. The air grew heavier, pressing down on me, choking the words from my mouth. I couldn't scream, couldn't run. Suddenly, a low hum filled the air, a soft, steady vibration beneath my feet. The ground trembled, ever so slightly, as if the road itself were alive, reacting to the presence of this figure. And then, the road ahead began to change, the smooth asphalt warping, twisting into something else, something ancient. I wanted to look away, to run, but my body refused to obey. The figure began to walk toward me, each step slow and deliberate. And as it did, the air grew colder, darker, as if the world itself was shrinking around me. I could feel the weight of 1,000 eyes on me, watching, waiting. 2:57. The figure was almost upon me now, its shape becoming clearer, its face, pale and empty, void of features, its eyes hollow, black as coal. The hair, long and matted, hung in tangled locks, but there was no sound, no breath, no life. And then, the voice. A whisper, barely audible, carried through the night air, chilling me to my core. "You shouldn't have come," it said, its tone low and haunting. "You shouldn't have followed the road." I tried to speak, tried to move, but no words came. My body was paralyzed, caught in the grip of something beyond my understanding. The figure stepped closer, its presence suffocating, and I felt myself being drawn toward it, unable to resist. The last thing I saw before everything went black was the figure's outstretched hand, reaching toward me, its fingers curling like claws. 3:24. And then, nothing. When I woke, I was back in my car, the engine running, the headlights still casting eerie shadows on the empty road. My heart was pounding in my chest, my hands trembling as I gripped the steering wheel. I looked around. The lane was gone. The perfect stretch of asphalt had vanished without a trace, leaving nothing but the dark, empty highway stretching endlessly before me. The fuel gauge was almost empty now, but I didn't care. I just wanted to leave. But as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me. Something I couldn't see but could feel, a presence, just behind me, watching. Waiting. And somewhere, in the distance, I swear I heard a voice, faint but unmistakable. "Don't look back." 4:10. View mirror was fogged over, just in the center, perfectly clear around the edges. Slowly, as though forced by an unseen hand, a figure began to form in the condensation. My heart lurched. The man from the back seat. His face, pale and smooth, began to emerge like a forgotten memory. But his eyes were the most unnerving part. They were wide, unblinking, and seemed to pierce right through me, even though he was no longer there. My breath caught in my throat, and the cold sweat that had been slowly soaking into my skin now trickled down my back like icy fingers. I swiped at the mirror with my sleeve, but the image remained. Even when I wiped the fog away, the figure lingered, etched into the glass like a ghost trapped in the reflection. I looked forward again, my grip tightening on the wheel. The lane stretched ahead, as if it had always been there, a part of the landscape, waiting. Something deep within me screamed to turn around, to find the nearest exit, to flee, but I couldn't. The road seemed to pull at me, guiding me forward. 4:30. I shook my head violently, trying to clear my thoughts. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. But every instinct in my body told me otherwise. I had to keep going, had to reach the next town, had to escape whatever was watching me. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it again. The man. He wasn't just in the mirror anymore. He was standing at the edge of the road, where the asphalt met the wild, overgrown grass. His figure was taller than I remembered, and there was something wrong about his posture, unnatural, like his body was bent at the wrong angles. He didn't move, just stared at me with those unblinking eyes. I slammed the brakes, the car skidding slightly on the gravel as I tried to stop. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty stretch of road ahead of me. No man. Nothing. Just the road. But then I heard it, a soft, barely audible tapping. 4:50. It was coming from inside the car. I froze, straining to hear. The sound was faint at first, almost like someone lightly tapping their fingers against the window. But then it grew louder, more insistent. The tapping turned into a slow, rhythmic knock, like someone trying to get my attention. It was coming from the back seat. I whipped around, my heart hammering in my chest. The back seat was empty, just like before. But as I stared at the empty space, a creeping realization dawned on me: the knocking wasn't coming from the window. It was coming from underneath the seat. 5:10. A cold chill ran through me, and for a split second, I considered leaving the car, running into the woods, and never looking back. But the fear, thick and suffocating, held me in place. I had no choice but to investigate. I reached for the door handle, my fingers trembling uncontrollably. As I swung the door open, the knocking stopped. Silence, as heavy as a stone, settled over me. But I knew it wasn't over. It never was. I dropped to my knees and pulled up the seat, my hands shaking. And then I saw it, something I should never have seen. A long, slender hand, pale and dry, clutched the underside of the seat. The fingers were unnaturally long, the nails yellowed and cracked. They twitched, slowly flexing as if trying to grasp something. The hand wasn't human. 5:30. I stumbled back, my head spinning. I slammed the seat back down and slammed the door shut. I didn't care if I was making a fool of myself. I had to get away. But as I started the engine, I felt it: something was in the car with me. I could feel the pressure, the weight of something sitting next to me. I didn't dare look. I just pressed my foot down on the gas pedal, the tires spinning as I sped away from the phantom road. I glanced at the rearview mirror again. This time, the man was in the reflection. Only now, his face was inches from mine, his mouth open, a distorted, silent scream stretched across his features. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My body was frozen, as if time itself had stopped. The man's eyes narrowed, and in that moment, I understood. He wasn't warning me to leave. He was telling me that it was too late. 5:50. The lane, still there in the mirror, had begun to disappear. It was fading, twisting, as though being swallowed by the night itself. But the man was still there, now standing directly behind me, his hands resting on my shoulders. I could feel the cold seeping into my skin as if he were breathing down my neck. The road stretched on forever, but the fear, this sickening, paralyzing fear, had never felt so real. I turned the wheel sharply, desperate to escape. But the car didn't respond. The steering wheel locked, the engine sputtered, and the car came to a dead stop. The man leaned in, his voice rasping in my ear: "You shouldn't have driven this road." And that's when I knew. I wasn't going to make it out. Not this time. 6 o'clock. The world went black. 6:16. To crack the window open, desperate for fresh air. But it didn't help. The smell clung to the interior of the car, thick and suffocating. It felt like the car itself was alive, like it was filled with an energy that didn't belong to this world, a presence that refused to leave. I glanced at the rearview mirror again, half expecting to see him there, his face still turned toward the window, oblivious to my frantic need to escape. But the mirror reflected nothing. Only the dark stretch of highway behind me, empty and still. Yet, something was wrong in a way I couldn't put into words. I slammed my foot harder on the accelerator, pushing the car faster, desperate to outrun whatever this was, whatever had followed me from that phantom lane. The needle on the speedometer climbed past 90, then 95, but the road seemed endless, stretching on and on, as if it had no end, no destination. 6:35. That's when I heard it, the tapping. It started soft, almost imperceptible at first, like the sound of a single finger tapping on glass. I told myself it was just the wind, just the hum of the engine, just my mind playing tricks. But the tapping grew louder, more insistent. It was coming from the back seat again, The same rhythmic, hollow tapping that made my stomach churn. I stole a glance in the rearview mirror, but this time I didn't see him. The man was gone. But the sound remained, growing louder, closer. I jerked my eyes back to the road, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. The tapping continued, and then it stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound itself, like the calm before a storm. And then, the smell returned. Old wool, mothballs, aftershave, and that unbearable, organic scent, the smell of something that had been buried for far too long. It invaded my senses, suffocating, choking the air out of my lungs. 6:55. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. The car was no longer mine. The road had become a living thing, pulling me deeper into its twisted embrace. I tried to scream, to cry out, but the words wouldn't come. I could feel my pulse in my throat, the beating of my heart in my ears, as I pressed harder on the accelerator. But the speed, the noise, the desperate need to escape, it was all futile. The lane beside me, the one that had no right to exist, was still there, following me. I couldn't look. But I did anyway. And when I glanced back at the mirror again, I saw him. The man. But this time, he wasn't sitting in the back seat. He was standing behind me, his reflection clear as day. He was right there, inches from my face, his hollow eyes staring directly into mine, his lips parted in a silent scream that echoed through my skull. 7:15. I couldn't move. The world around me seemed to distort, the road blurring, the headlights casting strange, twisting shadows. Everything felt wrong, out of place. The man's reflection began to fade, but his eyes, those eyes, lingered, burning into mine, searing themselves into my memory. The car lurched, the tires screeching against the asphalt as if the road itself was rejecting me. The smell was suffocating now, like a rotting presence, seeping through the air vents, filling the car with decay. I gasped for air, choking on the stench, desperate for any relief. But there was none. 7:35. I tried to pull over, to stop, to escape, but the steering wheel wouldn't respond. It was as if the car had taken control, steering me forward against my will. I could feel the pressure building in my chest, like the walls of the car were closing in on me. I was trapped. And then, just as quickly as it had all started, it stopped. The tapping, the smell, the oppressive weight of the presence in the car, everything vanished. The road ahead was quiet now, the lane beside me no longer following. The smell had dissipated. The air was still. I looked at the rearview mirror one last time, hoping, praying, that it was all over. But all I saw was the empty road behind me, stretching into the dark unknown. And then, just as I thought I was free, I heard the voice. Soft. Whispered. Don't stop, child. The road is never done with you. 7:55. I felt the car accelerate once again, as if guided by some unseen force. And the road, this road that should have been abandoned long ago, began to stretch out before me, endless, without end. And I realized, with a chill creeping down my spine, that this was no ordinary highway. It was a road that led to nowhere. And I was never going to leave. 8:28. We're moving at the same speed, perfectly aligned with my own vehicle, though their shapes were distorted in the darkness. They were like shadows, spectral and faint, their headlights flickering in and out of focus. I could barely make out their outlines, but I could tell they were there, moving with an eerie precision, as if they were part of some macabre procession. I felt my throat tighten, the air in the car growing thick with a sense of impending doom. The man in the back seat had not said a word, but his eyes, those dark, hollow eyes, never left me. They were filled with something I couldn't name, something ancient and hungry. And as I turned my gaze back to the empty lane, my stomach sank. The cars, or whatever they were, had multiplied. There were now dozens of them, all traveling in perfect unison with me, their headlights illuminating the stretch of road in an otherworldly glow. None of them had drivers. The wind howled through the cracked window, but there was no sound coming from the vehicles, not even the faint hum of engines. I slammed my foot on the accelerator, desperate to pull away, but the car didn't respond. The needle on the speedometer stayed at 85 miles per hour, and no matter how hard I pressed, it refused to go faster. The lane beside me seemed to stretch endlessly, a black ribbon of asphalt that had no end. The phantom cars kept pace, their shadows flickering in and out like they were fading in and out of reality itself. 8:50. I wanted to scream. I wanted to do something, anything to break free from this nightmare, but my body refused to move. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, the weight of the air pressing down on me, suffocating. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take it any longer, I noticed something even more disturbing. In the back seat, the man's mouth was still moving. I couldn't hear his voice, but the shapes of his lips seemed to form the same words over and over again, each time more frantic than the last. The words were painfully familiar, like a half-forgotten chant that I should have remembered. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't recall them. And then, the hand. His pale, thin fingers stretched out and pointed toward the other cars once more, but this time his motion seemed different, deliberate. He wasn't simply showing me the lane anymore. He was urging me toward it. I couldn't resist. My body moved of its own accord, my eyes locked onto the empty lane, my hands gripping the wheel with a mindless determination. The world outside the car began to warp, the edges of reality blurring, and I could feel myself being pulled towards something dark, something I knew I shouldn't face. 9:10. The cars on the phantom lane began to shift, their shapes twisting like reflections in water, and the darkness between them seemed to grow. As I drew closer, I could see the faintest flicker of movement inside the vehicles, figures, shadows of people who were not quite human. Their faces were blurry, out of focus, but their eyes, those eyes, were staring at me. I wanted to turn away, but I couldn't. The road ahead was no longer just a road. It had become a living thing, stretching, expanding, pulling me deeper into its twisted web. The headlights of the other cars grew brighter, brighter still, until I was blinded by their intensity. And then, the sound returned. A low hum, like the buzzing of 1,000 flies. It was coming from the road, from the cars, from the very air itself. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the car, through my bones, until it felt like it was coming from inside my skull. 9:30. I closed my eyes, hoping it would stop, hoping that if I just shut myself off from it all, it would go away. But when I opened them again, the back seat was full. The man, the faceless, hollow-eyed figure, was standing behind me, his hands resting on the back of my seat. He was so close now that I could feel the cold of his touch through the fabric. He leaned forward, his lips parting, and in a whisper that I could hear even over the roar of the engine and the buzzing of the hum, he spoke. "Welcome to the road that never ends," he said. "You can never leave once you've been here." 9:50. The car jerked violently, and for a moment, I thought I might lose control. But I didn't. The steering wheel locked in place, the car continuing on its own, guided by an unseen hand. I had no choice but to follow. I looked back one last time, and in that final glance, I saw the truth. The cars, the figures, the road, it was all part of something much older than I could ever understand. A cycle that had been repeating for decades, maybe centuries. And I was just another lost soul, trapped in a never-ending loop, bound to the road like the others before me. 10 o'clock. The man's figure was gone now, but his voice echoed in my ears, a haunting reminder of the fate that awaited me. I didn't need to look at the rearview mirror anymore. I knew what I would see. The lane was still there, still following me, and I knew, deep down, that it would always be there, waiting for the next lost traveler to drive down its endless path. 10:35. The highway, a figure appeared. It wasn't a car, nor a person. It was something far more sinister, something that didn't belong. It was an old, crumbling road sign, half buried in the dirt, its edges jagged and decayed, barely clinging to the rusted post that held it upright. But it wasn't the sign that filled me with dread. It was what was written on it. The letters were barely legible, but they were clear enough to send a chill crawling down my spine. You are next. I could feel the car's engine purring under my feet, but I didn't dare to take my eyes off the sign. The convoy of cars continued to pass me, their headlights glowing like burning eyes in the darkness. The drivers didn't waver, didn't look away. They were locked into their formation, moving towards something, or someone, that was waiting. The figure in the back seat had turned, no longer facing me but now staring straight ahead, his lips curled into a grotesque grin that stretched too far for any human face. His eyes, dark and hollow, flickered with something darker than simple malice. It was hunger. And it was then that I realized the true purpose of this road, this procession. They were waiting for me. 10:55. I tried to turn away, tried to focus on the road in front of me, but it was no use. I was being pulled toward the sign, toward the gathering of figures that waited patiently, their eyes all trained on me. The car, now beyond my control, refused to slow down, its headlights locked on that terrible road sign, as if it too knew where I was headed. I didn't want to look back, but I did. The back seat was empty. The man, the figure that had been watching me with such terrifying intensity, was gone. A wave of panic washed over me, and I slammed my foot on the brake. The car responded, but too late. The tires screeched, and I could feel the road beneath me shift, as if the asphalt was changing, buckling under the weight of what was to come. The sign, the figures, everything began to blur. I could hear the faint hum again, like a buzzing, a low vibration from within the car, growing louder, almost vibrating the very air I breathed. The convoy's headlights continued to flash past me in synchronized, rhythmic pulses, and the ominous figure in the back seat suddenly reappeared. Only now, he wasn't smiling. His face was blank, empty, his eyes empty pits of black, staring ahead as though no longer concerned with me. But then, the car jerked. The steering wheel locked again, and with a sickening lurch, I was pulled forward, unable to do anything but watch as the road ahead swallowed me whole, the sign growing larger and larger in my windshield. The convoy had stopped. Every car, every figure, had come to a halt. The headlights were now all aimed directly at me. They were waiting. I was the one they had been waiting for. 11:20. The car came to a sudden stop, and the world outside the windshield went dark. The faint hum ceased, leaving an eerie silence. I tried to move, tried to step out, but my limbs felt like they were made of stone, frozen in place. My breath came in ragged gasps as the weight of the car pressed in around me. In the silence, a voice echoed through my mind, a voice that was not my own, but familiar. You shouldn't have come, it whispered. You were never meant to be here. And then, without warning, the headlights flickered, and the convoy of cars slowly began to move again. But this time, they weren't moving in perfect formation. They were circling around me. Closing in. I realized, too late, that I had become part of the procession. The road I had thought was a path to escape was now a trap, and I was its next victim. I looked back one last time, hoping against hope to see something familiar, but there was only darkness. The man in the back seat was gone, but his presence remained, suffocating the air around me. The car engine sputtered, and I could feel the cold grip of inevitability tighten around my chest. The cars were drawing closer, their headlights blinding, their engines humming like a hive of trapped bees. And in the distance, the road sign, now towering above me, flashed its terrible warning once again. You are next. The convoy was no longer just a procession. It was a judgment. And it was coming for me. 12:45. Car veered sharply, tires screeching against the asphalt, the sound of rubber meeting road a harsh, desperate cry. My heart hammered in my chest, adrenaline surging through my veins as I forced the car toward the left fork, away from the hypnotic pull of the phantom lane. For a moment, I thought I was free. The road ahead seemed brighter, more welcoming, as I raced toward the distant lights of the town, the normal world I had been craving. The convoy of vintage cars, their haunting procession, faded in my rearview mirror, their ghostly headlights no longer a part of my reality. I breathed a sigh of relief, my hands shaking as I gripped the wheel. But the relief was short-lived. 12:57. In the distance, the lights of the town flickered, wavering as though they, too, were unsure of their place in this world. The shadows stretched longer than they should, and the road ahead began to distort, as if the very landscape were fighting back against my escape. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks, but deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong. The lights ahead weren't welcoming, they were deceiving. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the convoy still following me, but what I saw was far worse. The man, no longer smiling, was sitting in the passenger seat now, his cold eyes fixed on me. The car was no longer mine. 13:18. Before I could react, the air in the car turned dense, oppressive, and the familiar hum of the engine began to sound hollow, as if it were coming from miles away. The road twisted and bent unnaturally beneath me, the familiar curves becoming sharper, more pronounced. The headlights flickered, casting long, jagged shadows on the pavement. I tried to brake, but the pedal was unresponsive. The car continued to move forward, as if it had a mind of its own, steering me back toward the road I had just fled from. And then, it happened. 13:34. The fork in the road, appeared again. Not as a choice, but as a path I was being forced to take. The smooth, gleaming black surface of the phantom lane stretched before me like a mouth opening wide, ready to swallow me whole. I slammed the steering wheel to the left once again, but the car didn't respond. My body went cold as realization hit me with full force, I was no longer in control. The road, the car, the presence in the back seat, they were all part of the same dark force. The moment I had tried to flee had only pulled me deeper into its grasp. In the mirror, the man's face appeared again, but this time, his eyes weren't empty. They were filled with something far darker. Something that held ancient knowledge of what would happen next. His voice filled my mind once again. 13:57. "Welcome home, Thomas," he whispered, his tone cold, final. "You've always known this was where you belonged." I wanted to scream, to fight back, but no sound left my lips. My body was frozen in place, as if the very air around me had turned to stone. The phantom lane stretched on, and as I drove, I felt it, the pull, the inevitable tug toward the waiting convoy. The vintage cars, their drivers now looking directly at me, continued their eternal journey, no longer simply vehicles but part of the same twisted road that had claimed so many before me. The smile on the man's face in the mirror widened once more, but this time, it wasn't just a smile. It was a grin, a grotesque, knowing grin. And behind it, I could see the road ahead, the endless road of lost souls, all destined to wander forever in that same cursed procession. And as my car drifted forward, inexorably drawn toward the convoy, I realized, I was one of them now. 14:50. Doesn't end when you think it does. At night, the memories still cling to me like the cold fog that never seems to leave the roads where I once drove. I can still hear the hum of the engine, the screech of the tires, the endless, rhythmic pulse of the convoy behind me. It's as if the night was never truly over. I've tried to move on. The streets I take now are quieter, more familiar, nothing like the highway that led me to that empty lane. But there are moments when I let my guard down, that I feel it. The pull. I know I shouldn't look, but sometimes, when the darkness falls just right and the hum of the tires on the asphalt seems to fade into a kind of silence that feels wrong, I catch myself checking the rearview mirror. And when I do, I see it. Not always, not every time, but enough to make me question if I ever truly left. Charcoal gray fabric. A flash of it in the corner of my vision. It's fleeting, just a glimpse, but it's enough. Enough to remind me that the convoy is still out there. That the road, that impossible lane, is still waiting. And I'm not sure how long I can keep ignoring it. Every time I drive now, part of me wonders, when will the road call again? When will I face that choice once more? Because, deep down, I know the truth. Some roads, once taken, never truly let go. 1705. Continued its eerie progression, stepping right through the solid wall as if the barrier didn't exist, leaving no trace behind. My breath caught in my throat. I stood frozen, my body rigid, eyes wide in disbelief. That wasn't possible. It couldn't have been me. I hadn't moved, I hadn't even stepped into the hallway. My body trembled, my skin prickling with a cold that wasn't from the AC. It was the feeling of something wrong, something unnatural that had seeped into my very bones. I forced myself to step forward, the sound of my own footsteps startlingly loud in the silence. Each creak of the floorboard seemed to echo through the apartment as I moved cautiously toward the wall, where my silhouette had passed through. My mind raced, trying to rationalize what I had just witnessed, but the answer was elusive, slipping through my grasp like sand. I reached the wall, my fingers trembling as I touched the spot where the silhouette had disappeared. The drywall felt solid beneath my fingertips, nothing strange, nothing out of the ordinary. I pressed my hand against it, my heart still racing, but I could feel nothing, no signs of anything out of place. I leaned back against the wall, my breath coming in shallow gasps, trying to steady myself. The apartment felt more suffocating now, the walls closing in. My eyes darted around the hallway, looking for any sign that something was wrong. But there was nothing. Just the silence. 1726. Then came the sound. The softest of footsteps, just beyond the doorframe at the end of the hall. They were slow, deliberate, almost as if they were pacing back and forth. I froze again. My heart thudded so loudly I thought it might burst from my chest. There was no mistaking it now, someone, or something, was in the apartment with me. I turned slowly, my feet dragging against the floor as I made my way back toward the bedroom. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the air had thickened around me, pulling me down. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob, but before I could turn it, I heard it again. A whisper, faint but distinct, right behind me. "You know we're still here." I whipped around, but there was no one there. The hallway was empty, still as the grave. The voice had been so close, almost breathless. It was too much. The overwhelming sense of dread that filled the room, the apartment, it was all too much. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't make sense of what was happening. 1747. And then I saw it again. The silhouette. It stood in the doorway of the bedroom, its form just visible in the dim light from the hallway. It stood perfectly still, watching me, as if waiting for something. I opened my mouth to scream, but the sound got caught in my throat. The air around me felt like it was thickening, pressing in on me from all sides, suffocating me. My legs felt weak, my body trembling uncontrollably. The figure stepped forward, its movement slow and deliberate, and I felt my mind begin to unravel. It was a mirror image of me, but it wasn't me. Not anymore. It didn't look alive. It didn't feel alive. I backed away into the corner of the room, my eyes fixed on the figure as it moved closer. It reached out a hand, its fingers long and pale, and I could feel my heart beat louder, faster. The figure's hand stopped just inches from my face. I could see it clearly now, the hollow, empty eyes staring at me, unblinking, the mouth slightly parted as if it were waiting to speak. The words it whispered next cut through the silence like a knife. "You can't run anymore. This is your home now." The last thing I felt was the coldness of its hand, brushing against my cheek, and then everything went black. 1858. Eyes and a too-wide grin. I paid him quickly, barely making eye contact, feeling a strange sense of unease just from his presence. As I closed the door behind him, I realized how absurd this had all become, how paranoid I was. But the dread hadn't left. It had only settled into my chest like a heavy stone, weighing down on my every movement. I ate in silence, my eyes darting to every corner of the apartment, every shadow that seemed to shift just beyond my peripheral vision. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual, each second stretching out longer than the last. The apartment felt too still, too quiet. I glanced at the hallway, the same place where the figure had walked through the wall, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The silence seemed to grow thicker, suffocating me. My eyes locked on the hallway again, and there it was. Just for a split second, a faint silhouette appeared, flickering at the edge of my vision. I blinked, and it was gone. 1910. I stood up so fast my chair tipped over, but I couldn't make myself move past the threshold of the hallway. The dread gripped me harder than before, an icy hand wrapping around my ribs, squeezing the air from my lungs. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. It was all becoming too much. Then the sound came. A soft, slow tapping. It came from the end of the hall, faint at first but growing louder with every passing second. Tap, tap, tap. I knew what it was, even before I saw it. The figure. It was there again, at the end of the hallway, standing just beyond the corner of the bathroom door. It was still, motionless, as if waiting for me to acknowledge it. I couldn't make out its features, but I could feel its presence in every inch of my skin. The same cold, the same heaviness in the air that pressed down on me. The figure turned, its head jerking in a way that seemed unnatural, its hollow eyes locked on me. And I felt it, the same suffocating gaze, the same invitation, pulling me toward it. I turned away, taking a step back into the living room, but I couldn't escape the growing tension. I pressed my back against the wall, feeling the rough texture against my skin as I slid down to the floor. 1933. The tapping stopped. Then, a voice. Soft, almost too faint to hear, but unmistakable in its intent. You can't outrun it. The words were like ice water poured into my veins. They didn't come from the figure. They came from everywhere. The walls, the air, the very space around me. And then, just as quickly as they had come, they stopped. The room was completely still, too still. The silence was deafening, and I couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't even blink. I was trapped. But then, something shifted. The air in the apartment seemed to grow warmer, the tension easing just a little, but only enough to make me feel like I wasn't suffocating. I could breathe again, but that didn't mean I was free. The figure was gone. At least, I thought it was. 1956. I didn't know how much time had passed, but when I finally moved, it was as if I had been frozen in place for hours. My legs were stiff, my head heavy with exhaustion, but I couldn't bring myself to go to sleep. I couldn't let my guard down. I turned to look at the hallway again, cautiously this time. The space was empty. But I didn't trust it. The oppressive feeling lingered, and I knew it wasn't gone. It was just waiting for the next moment. As I moved back toward the bedroom, I couldn't help but feel like I was walking in a dream, a nightmare that I couldn't escape from. I reached for the light switch, flicking it on, but the room didn't brighten. Instead, the shadows seemed to stretch, crawl, and twist into shapes they weren't supposed to take. And in that moment, I knew. I hadn't escaped. Not really. The figure was still with me, waiting. 21:05. Audible creak of floorboards. I pressed my ear harder against the cold wall, straining to hear more, my heart pounding in my chest. What could possibly be happening on the other side of the wall? I had never heard Mrs. Chen make this kind of noise before. She was always so quiet, almost silent, even when she was home. I stepped back, my legs weak beneath me, as if the tension in the air had drained all the strength from my body. The cold was unbearable now, and the blanket I had wrapped around myself felt useless, like a paper-thin barrier between me and whatever was happening in this apartment. I looked down the hallway toward the door leading to Mrs. Chen's apartment. The only sound now was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, blending into the steady, unrelenting rhythm of my own pulse. I felt the urge to run, to escape, but my legs wouldn't move. Then, something shifted in the darkness. 21:26. I turned toward the hallway, instinctively drawn to the shadows. The air grew thicker, colder, as though something was filling the space, something that wasn't supposed to be there. A feeling, heavy, pressing down on me, began to swell within the room. The apartment, which had once been my sanctuary, now felt like a cage, closing in around me with every breath I took. The silhouette appeared again, but this time, it wasn't walking. It was standing at the far end of the hallway, just outside my bedroom door, facing the wall, motionless. Its form was so indistinct in the dim light, yet so perfectly defined in the dark space around it. And then I saw it again, the shadow. The same impossibly dark figure that hadn't been cast by any light source in the room, stretching unnaturally long and wide across the wall. My body went numb. My chest tightened with the weight of realization. It wasn't just a shadow. It was following me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. 21:50. The figure in the hallway shifted. Slowly, deliberately, it began to turn, its face still hidden in the darkness. A wave of cold swept through the room, rushing past me like the breath of something ancient and dead. I staggered back, my legs barely holding me upright, as the figure moved toward me. It didn't make a sound, no footfalls, no breath, just a creeping silence that chilled me to my core. It was getting closer, and I could feel it, like a presence behind me, pushing me forward into the inevitable. Then, in a whisper too soft for human ears but too loud in the quiet, the voice came. "You can't run from yourself, Thomas. Not anymore. 2200 hours." I closed my eyes tightly, wishing for it all to stop, but when I opened them again, the figure was standing right in front of me. Its face was obscured, just a blur, a distorted mass of shadows that seemed to stretch and writhe like smoke. The air around it crackled with an unnatural energy, and I could feel the cold of its presence crawling under my skin. I tried to speak, tried to scream, but the words didn't come. It was as if the very act of trying to escape had stolen my voice. The figure raised one hand slowly, its fingers long and pale, reaching out toward me. I wanted to move, to flee, but I was paralyzed. The cold, the fear, the presence. It was suffocating. It was only when its fingers brushed against my cheek, icy, like the touch of death itself, that I finally snapped out of my stupor. 22:20. I bolted. I didn't care where I was going. I didn't care about anything except putting as much distance between me and that thing as possible. My feet pounded against the floor, each step heavy and desperate, but when I reached the front door and twisted the handle, I found it locked. I screamed, pulling at the door in a frenzy, but it wouldn't open. I turned back to the hallway. The figure was gone. But it wasn't. The hallway was empty, but the air was thick with its presence. I could still feel it, standing just beyond my sight, watching me, waiting. I heard a sound, faint, at first, but growing louder. A voice. A whisper. "You can't run, Thomas. Not from yourself." The apartment had become something else, something I couldn't escape, and I knew in that moment that I was never leaving. The figure had come for me, and now, it was part of me. 23:25. Weeks worth of outfits, each one worn by a different version of myself. The figures moved silently, their feet gliding across the floor without the slightest sound, their faces indistinct and blurred, as if they were reflections from a nightmare, half-formed and unfinished. I stood frozen in place, unable to move, unable to tear my eyes away. The silhouettes continued their procession, walking in perfect synchronization, each wearing clothes I had worn on specific days over the past week. Their presence was suffocating, a palpable force that made the air feel heavier, colder. The first figure, the one in my work outfit from Friday, paused in front of the bathroom door, its back to me, as if waiting for something. The others followed suit, coming to a perfect halt, as though obeying an unspoken command. For a moment, there was silence. And then, one by one, they turned toward me. Each figure's face remained a blur, a smear of shadow and light, but I could feel their eyes. I could feel them staring at me, judging me, waiting. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came. My throat was dry, my chest tight, as if the very act of breathing had become an impossibility. The figure in the front, the one from Friday, lifted its hand and pointed directly at me. Its finger was long, unnaturally so, and the motion seemed deliberate, calculated. My heart raced, panic surging through my veins as I tried to back away, but I couldn't. My legs refused to move, frozen in place by a force I couldn't understand. Then, the figure spoke. 2348. Its voice was distorted, like a whisper carried on the wind, barely audible. You can never escape what you are. The words reverberated in my mind, sinking deep into my skull, and for a moment, everything around me seemed to blur. The apartment, the figures, the walls, it all dissolved into a haze of indistinct shadows and shapes. I could still feel them, though. I could still feel their presence, their cold, relentless gaze bearing down on me. The figures began to move again, slowly at first, but then with an increasing speed. The air grew thick, oppressive, as if the apartment itself was closing in on me, suffocating me. I tried to scream, to beg for release, but my voice was lost in the void. The silhouettes moved in perfect formation, closing in around me, their faces now becoming clearer, their features sharp and unsettling. Each one looked like me, but not me, not the version of myself I recognized. Their eyes were hollow, empty, and their smiles twisted into grotesque versions of my own. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, they stopped. I found myself back in the hallway, the figures now standing still, lined up in front of me. The room was silent once more, the oppressive weight of their presence pressing in on me from all sides. The first figure stepped forward, its fingers reaching toward me. I could feel the cold radiating from its touch, but I couldn't pull away. You've always been a part of us, it whispered, its voice now clear, close, echoing inside my head. This is where you belong. The world around me began to fade, the light dimming as the shadows deepened, and I knew in that moment, knew with an unshakable certainty, that there was no escape. No place I could run to. They were me. And I was them. And the cycle would never end. 25:30. Me. I could feel the pulse of my heartbeat in my throat as I sat in the darkness, the air thick with an electric tension that made it impossible to think clearly. My breath came in shallow gasps, and every creak of the building, every gust of wind outside, set my nerves on edge. I was waiting for the first shadow, the first sign that they were coming. The apartment felt alive with their presence. It was as though the walls themselves knew they were about to cross into the space I inhabited. I wasn't sure what I was trying to accomplish, whether I truly believed I could stop them or if I just needed to face it head-on, once and for all. I didn't have long to wait. 25:46. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the silence shattered. I heard the faintest tap, tap, tap of footsteps from beyond the wall. It was the same sound I had come to dread, the same rhythm, the same deliberate movement. Slowly, I stood up, my legs stiff from the tension. I didn't look at the hallway mirror. I didn't dare. I focused all my attention on the space in front of me, the narrow corridor leading from my bedroom to the door. The first silhouette appeared just like before, walking along the edge of the hallway. It wore the jacket I'd worn to my first job interview, the very one I had tossed into the back of my closet years ago. The figure's face was a blur, its movements graceful and eerie, like a shadow moving across the floor. It didn't stop. It didn't even acknowledge me. It walked right through the wall as though it had always been part of the apartment, always been a part of this world. I swallowed hard, my mouth dry. There was no escape. 26:05. The second silhouette appeared, dressed in the same clothes I'd worn on my first date with Sarah, dark jeans and a blue button-up shirt. The figure moved exactly as I did that night, each step matching my own youthful anticipation from so many years ago. But this time, there was no joy, no nervous excitement. Just an empty, mechanical motion, the kind of movement you'd expect from something that had long since given up on ever being alive. It didn't even glance in my direction. It walked through the wall, and I was left staring at the empty hallway once again. I could feel it then, the pressure building, like the air in the apartment was thickening. The silhouettes weren't just moving through my walls, they were moving into me, erasing me, one memory at a time. 26:30. The third silhouette appeared, and this time, my heart almost stopped. It was wearing the sweatshirt I had worn the day my father died. I could smell the faint scent of old leather and tobacco clinging to the fabric, a scent that had never left the hoodie. The figure walked with a heavy, slow gait, like it was carrying the weight of something unbearable. I couldn't breathe. The memories of that day came flooding back in waves, my father's last words, the look in his eyes as he struggled to speak, the numbness that had settled over me when I realized I was losing him. The figure passed me, just like the others, and moved through the wall. I staggered back, clutching the edge of the hallway for support. The cold sweat on my skin made me shiver, and my legs felt like they might give way. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't stop them. 26:56. The figures kept coming, one after the other, each representing a different moment, a different version of me. The black and white photograph of my childhood self, the college sweatshirt I wore on my first day at university, the old leather jacket I had worn on my road trip with friends. They were all there, walking past me in perfect synchronization, never stopping, never acknowledging my presence. Each figure was another link in the chain that had bound me to this place, this apartment, this nightmare. I screamed, a guttural, desperate cry that was swallowed up by the walls. The figures were still walking. The parade of my past selves continued, each step carrying me further away from who I was, closer to the thing I had feared the most. 27:20. And then, the last figure appeared. It was me. Me, but older, eyes hollow, face gaunt and tired. I recognized the clothes, it was the jacket I had worn the day I moved into this apartment. It wasn't the jacket that was familiar, though. It was the look in the figure's eyes, the emptiness, the exhaustion, the hopelessness. It was the me I feared becoming. The figure walked toward me, its movement slow, deliberate, and as it passed me, its cold, empty eyes met mine. "You can never escape who you are," it whispered, and the sound was like a knife scraping across my soul. "You've always been here." I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I could only watch as the last figure disappeared into the wall, leaving me alone in the hallway once more. But I wasn't alone. The apartment was filled with them, all of them. My past, my future, all trapped in this place, walking the same endless path. And I was the one who had invited them in. The weight of the words, the truth they carried, pressed down on me like an anchor, pulling me deeper into the void. I had become one of them, one of the endless parade of memories, forever walking, never free. And now, there was no way out. 27:40. I stopped leaving my apartment altogether. The thought of stepping outside, into the world that I used to know, became unbearable. Each night, the silhouettes grew more numerous, their procession lengthening, weaving through the walls with relentless precision. Every step they took echoed in the very fabric of my apartment, marking the passage of time in ways that felt out of my control. The boundary between my past, present, and future blurred with each passing night. I noticed more changes in my apartment. Small things at first, an item in the wrong place, a chair slightly shifted, a book opened to a page I hadn't turned to. But as time went on, these subtle displacements became more pronounced. Sometimes the furniture would be moved entirely, as if the apartment itself was being rearranged, as if the walls were closing in around me, shifting to accommodate these intrusions from another version of reality. 28:03. The worst part, though, was the feeling that I wasn't alone anymore. It wasn't just the silhouettes in my apartment. It was me. A new me. One that wasn't my reflection, but someone or something that had emerged in my absence. At times, I would catch glimpses of myself in the corner of my eye, walking through the hall, sitting on the couch, making a cup of coffee, but when I looked directly at the figure, it wasn't there. The compulsion to follow their path, to walk through my apartment as they did, became overpowering. It wasn't something I could resist. My body would move without my consent, mirroring their steps, their exact motions, as if my own will had become irrelevant. My legs would carry me to the kitchen, and I would stand there for minutes, staring at the counter, doing nothing, waiting for the inevitable return of the figures. I realized something worse. I was becoming one of them. 28:30. The shift wasn't immediate. It was subtle at first. A change in how I thought. A small decision to sit where the figure had sat, or stand where the figure had stood. But as the days blurred together, I couldn't remember what I had done versus what they had done. The lines between us began to merge. I didn't know which version of myself was in control anymore. The mirrors, the ones I had stopped looking into, began calling to me. There was no reflection anymore. When I dared to glance into the bathroom mirror one morning, I saw only a face, my face, but somehow not mine. It was too still, too blank, the eyes not quite seeing. I blinked, and the face seemed to blink back at me. But the reflection held steady, unblinking. I couldn't remember how long I had been standing there, but when I turned away, I felt the cold press of something new, the same icy grip I had felt when the first silhouette passed through me. But now, it wasn't the figure I was encountering. It was myself. My reflection, walking alongside me, step by step, matching my every movement, every thought. 29:00. The apartment had become a cage, but not just of walls and doors. It was the shifting fabric of time itself, folding in on me, pulling me into an endless loop of memories, of versions of myself that existed and were now vanishing. The silhouettes had stopped simply walking through my walls. Now, they waited, their eyes, though indistinct, watching, waiting for me to join them completely. Each night, I'd see them there, standing still at the far end of the hallway, their forms flickering like old film footage, as though they were waiting for me to finally become one of them. I didn't have the strength to fight it anymore. I'd long stopped hoping to escape. Now, when I walk through the apartment, I am not walking alone. The figure walking beside me, mirroring every step, every motion, is me. I can't tell anymore which version is real, whether the figure is a future me or the past version that's finally caught up to the present. And soon, I know, I'll have to join them. I'll have to walk through the wall, through the door, just like they did, fading into the same endless procession that has now become my own existence. 29:30. The worst part is, I'm not sure if I've already joined them. 30:05. The wardrobe door swayed gently, creaking on its hinges, though there was no breeze, no movement in the room to explain it. I hesitated, standing frozen in the center of the hallway, the pulse of my heart hammering in my ears, louder than the silence that enveloped me. The air around me felt colder, the shadows deeper, like the very space I was standing in had become a void, an emptiness that was swallowing me whole. I forced myself to step forward, the floorboards groaning under my weight as I moved toward the wardrobe. Each step felt wrong, as if the air itself was pushing me back, as if I were being drawn into something I couldn't see, something I couldn't fight. The wardrobe doors stood slightly ajar, as if they were waiting for me to open them fully. I reached for the handle, my fingers trembling as I pulled the doors wide. Inside, I saw nothing but the usual clutter, old coats, a couple of boxes, my shoes scattered in the corner. Nothing out of place, nothing unusual, yet the sense of wrongness was overpowering. 30:20. I was about to turn away when something caught my eye. A small, dark shape, barely visible against the clutter, was lodged behind the boxes at the back of the wardrobe. It was something I hadn't noticed before, something that didn't belong there. I knelt down and pulled the box aside, my hands shaking. My breath caught in my throat when I saw what it was. It was a pair of shoes. My shoes. The same ones I had worn months ago, the ones I'd thrown away after they had fallen apart, the soles cracked and worn through. How were they here? How had they ended up in my wardrobe? I hadn't seen them since I threw them out. I reached for them instinctively, and the moment my fingers touched the worn leather, a sharp chill ran through my body. The temperature in the room dropped further, and the weight in the air grew heavier, as if something had just shifted. Something ancient. 30:40. I pulled the shoes out, turning them over in my hands. That was when I saw it, an old, faded receipt tucked into one of the shoes, crumpled but still legible. My heart sank. It was from a store I hadn't visited in years, a store I hadn't even thought about since moving here. It was dated, yesterday. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just the shoes that were out of place, it was everything. The wardrobe. The receipt. The feeling that had settled in my chest, that sinking dread that had been slowly creeping up on me ever since I'd moved into this apartment. 31:02. I stood up, the shoes now in my hands, and I felt it again, the sensation of being watched. The feeling that something had been here long before I ever stepped into the apartment. Something, or someone, had been waiting. And now, it was here. I looked around the room, the shadows growing more oppressive with every passing second. The walls seemed to close in, the space growing smaller, tighter. And as I turned toward the door, I saw it. A figure. Standing at the far end of the hallway, bathed in the faint glow of the hallway light. The same silhouette I had seen before. It was me. 31:30. But not me. A version of me, distorted and hollow, with eyes that burned into mine, empty of recognition, empty of humanity. It moved toward me slowly, almost casually, as if it had all the time in the world. My legs refused to move. My breath caught in my throat. It was impossible. It couldn't be happening. But there it was, growing closer, its footsteps silent on the floor, its eyes locked onto mine, its expression unchanging. I couldn't look away. My own reflection, my own ghost, was approaching me. And with each step it took, I felt my grip on reality slip a little more. It stopped just inches from me, its face too close, too familiar, the air growing colder with its presence. I could feel its breath on my skin, a cold gust that sent a shiver through my entire body. Its mouth opened, and for the first time, it spoke, though the words came not from its lips but from inside my head. "You've been here before, Thomas. You're always here." The voice echoed through my skull, each word reverberating like a distant memory, one that I had long since buried, one that now surfaced with terrifying clarity. And in that moment, I knew. I had never left. This apartment, this place, had been my prison all along. The versions of myself, the ones walking through the walls, the ones wearing clothes from the past and the future, they were me. 31:58. And I was trapped in a loop, a never-ending cycle, with no escape. The figure raised its hand, reaching out toward me. I could feel its cold, its weight, its presence overwhelming me. And as it touched my shoulder, everything went black. The crash had come, and now, it was time to stay. 34:15. Reality settled over me with an undeniable pressure. I could feel the photographs, each image, as though they were anchored in my very existence, not something fabricated or artificially constructed. These weren't just images of some other life, some imagined past. They were a part of me, and as much as I tried to dismiss them, the knowledge that they existed, that I had lived them, gnawed at the edges of my mind. I didn't want to open the album again, but my hands betrayed me, trembling as they reached for it once more. I felt an overwhelming need to find answers. To understand. I turned to the last page, and there, scrawled in a delicate, looping script, was something that stopped my breath cold. "Welcome back, Thomas. I dropped the album in a fit of panic, the leather cover slapping against the floor with a dull thud. The words echoed in my mind, their meaning crashing through me like a tidal wave. The connection. The knowing. I wasn't just looking at some alternate version of myself, some distorted parallel life. This album, this collection of memories, these were mine. They belonged to me. But not in the way I had thought. These were memories of a life I hadn't lived yet. A life I wasn't meant to live. I backed away from the album, my pulse a rapid thrum in my ears. My mind was a whirl of confusion, of disbelief. This apartment, this place that I thought I had just stumbled into, it wasn't just an apartment. It wasn't just a living space. It was a nexus, a twisted intersection of lives, of timelines, of versions of me that should never have met. And the more I looked at the photographs, the more I understood. The versions of me in the pictures were me, but not me. They had taken different paths, made different choices, lived different experiences. But they had all come back. And now, so had I. The building, the place where I lived, it wasn't just an apartment complex. It was a boundary, a point where all the different versions of myself converged, a place where time had folded in on itself. And now I was caught in the web of all these overlapping lives. The shadow of a life I never lived hung over me, watching, waiting. But what terrified me the most, what made my blood run cold, was the idea that I wasn't the only one who had come back. There were others, those figures in the hallway, those shadows moving through the walls. They weren't just remnants of the past. They were me, too. Different versions of me, wandering the same space, pulling at the threads of time. I couldn't escape it. I could feel them, all of them, shifting in the corners of my vision. Moving between the walls. Waiting for me to make the next move. Waiting for me to choose. And that's when I heard it again. The unmistakable sound of footsteps from the other side of the wall. The sound of another version of me, walking the same path through the apartment, as though nothing had ever changed. I stood frozen, every hair on my body standing on end. The weight of the situation pressed down on me, heavier than the walls themselves. And then I heard the whisper, faint but unmistakable, coming from the shadows in the corner of the room. "You can't escape, Thomas. You never left." I didn't know if I was losing my mind, or if the apartment itself had become a prison, trapping me in this endless cycle. But the truth was clear. I was trapped, not just in this building, but in my own existence, in all the lives I had lived and never lived. And as the footsteps grew louder, I knew that the choice I had once thought was mine, to leave or stay, was no longer mine to make. 38:13. Sensation that something was waiting in the wardrobe, something that had been hiding in the corners of my apartment for far longer than I cared to admit. The cold, oppressive atmosphere pressed in on me from all sides, and the silence was so thick I could almost feel it suffocating me. I forced myself to stand, my legs stiff and unsteady, and turned to face the wardrobe. The door hung ajar, as if inviting me to look inside, to confront whatever had been concealed there all this time. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to leave this place and never look back, but something held me in place. I took a step forward, my hand reaching out, fingers trembling as they brushed against the doorframe. As I touched the wood, the temperature around me seemed to drop further, and a low hum filled the air, vibrating through my bones. I took another step, my heart pounding in my chest, and pushed the wardrobe door open fully. Inside, everything was as it should be, clothes neatly arranged, boxes stacked in the corner. But as my eyes scanned the interior, I saw something that shouldn't have been there, a photograph, tucked behind a pile of old coats. I pulled it out, my hands shaking uncontrollably as I studied the image. It was the same photograph I had seen in the album, the one of me as a child in front of this very building. But this time, there was something new. Behind me, in the background of the photograph, stood the woman. She wasn't in the window, like before. She was in the room with me, standing just out of frame, her face obscured by shadow but her presence undeniable. I could feel her watching me, her eyes burning into me through the photograph, just as she had in the last image in the album. My breath caught in my throat as I flipped the photo over, desperate for any clue, any explanation. But there was nothing. Just a blank back, the same as any other photograph. I dropped the photo, and it fluttered to the floor, landing face up. The image of the woman in the background stared up at me, and for a brief moment, it almost seemed as though she was moving, shifting slightly, her expression growing more sorrowful with each passing second. 38:50. I stumbled back, my head spinning. The air felt charged, as if the very apartment itself were alive, breathing, pulsing with something ancient and restless. I couldn't take it anymore. My mind was unraveling, each thread snapping one by one, and I knew that if I stayed any longer, I wouldn't be able to tell where the apartment ended and I began. I turned to leave, to find some way out of this nightmare, but as I did, I heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible sound. A whisper. "You can't leave." I froze. The voice was familiar, but it wasn't mine. It was hers. The woman. Her voice echoed in my mind, and the words felt like a weight on my chest, impossible to ignore. I turned back toward the wardrobe, my gaze locking onto the open door, the darkness inside it seeming to stretch further than before, as though it were swallowing the light. I was no longer sure if I could trust my own senses. The photographs. The woman. The strange, ever-present feeling of being watched, it all felt like some twisted reality I could no longer escape from. I took a deep breath, my eyes glued to the darkness within the wardrobe, waiting for the inevitable. The silence stretched on, heavy and suffocating. And then, just as I thought I might finally break, the figure appeared again. In the doorway. Not just in the wardrobe, but standing there, just beyond the threshold of my apartment, her figure framed by the darkness. She didn't move, didn't speak, but her presence was so overwhelming that it felt as though the air itself was holding its breath. Her eyes, those eyes, bore into me, and I knew, without a doubt, that there was no escape from this. I wasn't just trapped in this apartment. I was trapped in this life, this loop, this twisted version of reality where every version of myself was waiting, watching, and where every photograph, every moment, was a fragment of something far more sinister than I could ever understand. And as the figure stepped forward, crossing the threshold into my apartment, I realized with growing terror. I had become part of the collection. 42:30. The mirror, its expression now one of resignation, as if it had known all along what was coming. The sadness in my reflection deepened, a silent acknowledgement that I was no longer in control, that whatever was happening had long since passed beyond the boundaries of my understanding. The album in my hands felt impossibly heavy, the warmth from its leather now like the heat of a living thing, pulsing, alive with the memories of a life I hadn't lived. The new pages, still appearing, still documenting moments I hadn't yet experienced, flipped on their own, as if the album was leading me, guiding me down a path I wasn't ready to walk but was being pulled toward regardless. I closed my eyes, the weight of it all crashing down on me like a tidal wave. I could no longer separate what was real from what was not. Every second I had lived, every moment I had believed to be mine, felt false, like a dream I had been trapped in. But this truth, was more frightening than anything I could have imagined. The light above flickered once more, and I heard the hum of the building's electricity grow faint, almost as if it were struggling to stay on. Then, in the sudden dark, I felt it, the unmistakable presence of her. The woman, always there, always watching, was closer now, standing just behind me. I could feel her warmth, her longing. I opened my eyes again, but the world had changed. The bathroom walls no longer looked like the ones I had spent countless nights in. They seemed distant now, like they were part of someone else's memory, someone else's past. I was no longer me. Not in the way I had once been. The album fell from my hands, landing softly on the floor, its pages fluttering like wings. As I turned toward the door, I saw her in the reflection of the mirror, her form more solid now, standing just beyond the threshold of the bathroom. She was reaching toward me, but this time her face was different. Her eyes were filled not with pity or regret, but with something softer, something like hope. I wanted to step forward. I wanted to go to her, to let her take me wherever this path was leading. But something held me back, something deep inside telling me that to move forward would mean leaving everything behind. I was no longer sure who I was supposed to be, who I was at all. Then, just as my mind was about to break, I heard the whisper again. It wasn't a voice. It was more like a presence, a sound that reverberated through the very air around me. It's time to come home. The words were familiar, not because I had heard them before, but because they felt like something I should have always known. I took a slow, hesitant step toward the door. The shadows in the corners of the bathroom seemed to retreat, the oppressive weight of the unknown lifting just a fraction. The woman's expression softened, her hand reaching out as if to guide me into the dark beyond, into the memory I had forgotten. I didn't look back at the apartment, at the life I thought I had lived. I followed her into the darkness. And for the first time, I felt like I was finally coming home. 46:54. It was loud, sharp, sudden, and completely out of place. The familiar sound of the door closing echoed through the house, but no one had entered or left. The rhythmic dripping from upstairs continued, but now it felt more insistent, more urgent, like it was demanding my attention, pulling my focus away from the strange disruption downstairs. I stood up, my cup of coffee forgotten on the table, its steam curling upward, dissipating into the oppressive air. I made my way toward the back door, the unease growing heavier with every step. As I reached the threshold of the kitchen, I paused, listening. The house was silent now, too silent. The rhythmic dripping had stopped. In its place, there was only the faintest sound of something dragging along the floor upstairs. I glanced up at the staircase. The shadows in the hallway had deepened, stretching unnaturally long as if the house itself were beginning to shift, its space growing more distorted with every passing moment. The kitchen light flickered, adding to the disorienting atmosphere. I moved toward the door, cautiously, half expecting something to be waiting for me on the other side. My hand hovered over the knob, the cold metal biting into my skin. I wasn't sure what I was afraid of, whether it was the silence, or the strange way the house seemed to hold its breath as I stepped forward. When I opened the door, the morning light outside seemed too bright, too sharp. But there was no one in the yard. There was no sign of anything having disturbed the air outside, yet the oppressive heaviness still hung in the air around me, suffocating me. I turned back to the stairs. And that's when I saw it. 47:20. Sarah's shadow was no longer flickering behind the bathroom door. It was motionless, solid, like a figure frozen in time. I stood there, staring at the bathroom door for what felt like an eternity, the silence growing deafening, the unease crawling under my skin. I had to move. I had to see what was happening. I didn't want to, but I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. I stepped forward, my breath shallow and quick, my legs trembling as I ascended the stairs. Each step creaked beneath my weight, echoing through the house like a drumbeat. The bathroom door was now fully open. I didn't knock. I didn't call out. I just stepped inside. The bathroom was empty. Except for the faintest trace of water on the floor, dark, thick, and glistening like something alive, a pool of it spread across the tiles, just beyond the sink, right where the sound of dripping had come from. But Sarah wasn't there. My breath caught in my throat, and I stepped closer, reaching out toward the wet floor. As my hand hovered above the dark water, a chill ran down my spine. There, in the center of the pool, lay something small, something unrecognizable at first, but when I knelt closer, I saw it. A piece of jewelry. A necklace, old-fashioned, worn, with a tarnished silver chain and a pendant in the shape of a heart. I reached for it, my fingers trembling, but as soon as I touched it, the bathroom light flickered again, and I heard the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open behind me. I turned. Sarah stood in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes hollow. She was looking at me, but it wasn't the same Sarah I knew. She didn't move. She didn't speak. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Just the air between us, heavy and thick, pressing down on me, suffocating me with the weight of the silence. And then, in the reflection of the mirror, I saw it. Something behind her. A figure, barely visible, standing just out of sight in the corner of the room. It wasn't quite human. It wasn't anything I recognized. But it was watching me. And then the room went black. 48:58. Protest, to tell her that I wasn't dreaming, that the sounds, the footsteps, the figure, everything had been real, but the words stuck in my throat. Her concern was genuine, but there was a sinking feeling in my chest that told me this wasn't about her, or even about what I had just experienced. It was something much deeper, something buried within this house, something that had reached into the very core of my perception and twisted it. "I'm fine," I managed to say, though the words felt hollow. I don't know. Maybe I was sleepwalking." I offered a weak smile, hoping it would convince both her and myself. But the doubt lingered, thick and suffocating. Sarah didn't seem entirely convinced, but she let it go. "All right, well, I'm heading back outside to get some fresh air. Let me know if you need anything," she said, stepping back toward the door. Her movements were calm, normal, everything about her was grounded in reality. But as she opened the door and stepped outside, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. The moment she stepped away, the apartment felt quieter, emptier, as though the very air had been sucked out of it. I turned toward the stairs, my eyes drawn once again to the bathroom at the end of the hallway. The memory of the last time I had seen Sarah, her reflection standing in the bathroom door, a figure in the shadows, made my stomach twist. The silence upstairs was too loud, too perfect, and in the absence of the dripping sound, it felt like something else had taken its place. A deeper presence, one that wasn't just in the house, but inside of me. 49:32. I couldn't stay still anymore. I had to move. I had to see what was happening, even if I was terrified of the answers. I walked slowly, hesitantly, toward the stairs, my feet dragging as if the floor beneath me was resisting every step. When I reached the top of the staircase, the temperature in the air seemed to drop again, and the sense of wrongness crept back in. The bathroom door was still partially open. The same sliver of yellow light spilled across the floor. But this time, it wasn't just the door. There was something else, something faintly outlined in the mirror's reflection. I knew I should turn away, that I should go downstairs and act like everything was normal. But I couldn't. I stepped closer, drawn by something I couldn't explain. The mirror, now reflecting my hesitant form, was still and clear, except for that faint outline. The woman from the photographs, her presence had lingered so long in my mind, I could almost see her moving in the glass, like a shadow out of place. But then, something in the reflection shifted. The figure in the bathroom mirror wasn't Sarah. It was me. 50:05. I froze. The reflection wasn't distorted, and yet it felt wrong. It was me, standing in the bathroom, staring back at myself through the mirror. The same scar above my eyebrow, the same tired eyes, but there was something else. The figure was smiling. Not a smile I had made, but one that appeared of its own volition, uninvited. It was the same sad, knowing smile I had seen in the photographs. The figure in the mirror turned its head, but it didn't just move, it watched me. It was aware of me. And for a moment, I swore I saw its eyes flicker with recognition. I stumbled back, the air thick with a pressure I couldn't understand. The reflection stayed still, but I felt something else, something outside the mirror, behind me. It was no longer just a reflection. It was an extension of myself, of something other, something that had been there all along. I closed my eyes, trying to shake the image from my mind, but when I opened them, the figure was still there, only this time, it wasn't in the mirror. It was standing behind me. I turned. The room was empty. The air around me was silent, yet the weight of presence lingered, heavy, palpable. I stepped back into the hallway, but I couldn't escape the feeling that something was following me. Sarah was gone. The house was still. But I wasn't alone. 51:00. The whisper returned, faint but unmistakable, drifting through the air like an invisible force. "You're here." Finally. I spun around, heart racing, but there was nothing. Only the sound of my breath, harsh and uneven. The walls closed in on me, and in the distance, I thought I heard footsteps again. Not Sarah's. Not my own. It was the echo of something waiting for me to remember. 50:53. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as the rhythmic dripping continued, each drop now resonating in my bones, vibrating through the floor beneath my feet. The sound was no longer just an annoyance, it felt like a presence, a force pushing its way into the very fabric of our reality. I glanced at Sarah, whose face had paled further, her eyes wide with the same growing horror I felt creeping into my own chest. Her hand was still hovering above the towel, unsure whether to touch it, but I could see the hesitation in her movements. Something was holding her back, just as it had been holding me. I don't understand, I muttered, more to myself than to Sarah. The towel wasn't just wet. It was drenched, dripping with cold water that seemed to defy the temperature of the room. And yet, it made no sense. The last time we had used the bathroom, the towel had been dry, left hanging untouched for days. The dripping grew louder still, each drop punctuating the silence with a sudden force that almost sounded like a whisper. The bathroom was freezing, too cold for late spring, and I shivered involuntarily as my breath formed small clouds in the air. The sound of the drops now felt like a countdown, a ticking clock pushing us towards some inevitable moment. I moved forward, my legs heavy as if the room itself was resisting my every step. The moment my fingers brushed against the towel, a shock of cold, almost searing, shot through me. It was like touching ice, but it wasn't just the towel, it was the air around me, too, pressing in from every direction, suffocating the warmth of the room. Sarah gasped. This doesn't make sense." I nodded, but my mind was racing, desperately trying to come up with any logical explanation for the impossible things happening around us. The towel wasn't just wet, it was wrong. The room, the house, it all felt wrong, as if reality was slipping just out of reach. Then, as if on cue, a cold breeze swept through the bathroom, rattling the window panes and causing the towel to swing slightly, as if caught in an invisible draft. But there was no wind, no open window. Something in the air shifted. The dripping sound stopped. For a single, terrifying moment, the bathroom was dead silent. But as the silence stretched on, I felt the change, the presence, the pressure in the room, growing stronger. The hairs on my skin stood on end as an unfamiliar weight settled in my chest. I couldn't breathe. And then, the voice. It wasn't Sarah's. It wasn't my own. It came from somewhere else, somewhere deeper. "You shouldn't have come back," the voice whispered, its tone smooth and cold, almost like a memory. I spun around, heart hammering in my chest. Sarah was staring at me, her face contorted with confusion, but I could see it in her eyes. She had heard it too. Did you hear that?" I whispered, barely able to force the words out. She nodded, her lips pressed tightly together as she took a step back. It came from in here." My eyes darted around the room, scanning every corner, but the source of the voice was nowhere to be seen. The bathroom, so familiar and mundane just moments before, now felt like a trap, a place where the walls themselves were closing in, hiding something far more dangerous than we could comprehend. The air had grown colder, but now it wasn't just the temperature, it was the feeling of it. A palpable sense of something unseen, pressing in from all sides, filling the room with a heavy weight of anticipation. And then, the voice came again, this time much closer, as if it were right behind me. "You can never leave this place." The word sent a chill through my spine, and before I could respond, the bathroom light flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. My breath caught in my throat, the oppressive silence now replaced with an unsettling stillness that swallowed every sound. I reached for the light switch, but the moment I touched it, the walls seemed to groan, the very structure of the house shifting with an unnatural force. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't just a bathroom. This wasn't just a house. It was alive, alive with something ancient, something that had been waiting for us. Waiting for me. The floorboards creaked underfoot. And then, the dripping began again. But this time, it wasn't just water. It was something else. Something darker. Something that was starting to pull us in, piece by piece. We weren't just in the house. We were part of it. 52:56. Then the strange events themselves. If my mind could betray me like this, what else was I missing? What else was slipping through the cracks of my perception, hiding in plain sight? The very foundation of my reality felt like it was crumbling, like the world I knew was slowly being replaced with something darker, something that made no sense. Sarah became more distant, too. She still slept in the room next to mine, but the warmth that had once filled our conversations, the simple comfort of knowing she was there, had vanished. Now, she was as silent as the house itself, the quiet between us growing thicker, heavier, until it was suffocating. We spoke only when necessary, exchanging brief words over meals, avoiding eye contact. There was a subtle tension in the air, an unspoken understanding that we both felt something was wrong but could neither face it nor name it. One night, I decided to try something, a test of sorts. I sat in the living room, staring at the door that led to the stairs. I watched the clock tick, the minutes dragging on as I forced myself to wait. I didn't want to be afraid anymore. I didn't want to keep questioning what was real. But when the clock struck 2:43 a.m., I heard it. The unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, each one sounding heavier than the last. They came from the staircase, from the direction of Sarah's room. But when I turned toward the stairs, the shadows at the top of the landing were empty. There was no figure, no movement. Yet the footsteps continued. I stood up, my heart hammering against my ribs, and walked toward the stairs. The sound grew louder, closer, but still, no one appeared. The moment I reached the first step, I froze. The footsteps stopped. I couldn't take it any longer. I ran up the stairs, each step feeling heavier, more reluctant than the last. When I reached Sarah's room, I found the door ajar, the faintest sliver of light spilling out from the cracks. I opened the door, expecting to find her asleep, as she always was. But the room was empty. The bed was made, the sheets smooth as if no one had slept there at all. I didn't need to search the rest of the house. I knew, with a sickening certainty, that Sarah wasn't there. I turned around, the silence in the hallway now deafening. The footsteps, the ones I had followed up the stairs, were gone. And as I walked back down the hallway, I passed the bathroom door. The towel was gone. But the air was still cold, and the shadows seemed to have thickened, as if they were waiting. I went to bed that night, lying awake in the darkness, my thoughts racing. What was happening to me? Was I losing my mind? Or was there something else here, something hiding in the corners, in the spaces between my thoughts, feeding off my fear? I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think clearly. The walls of the house felt like they were closing in on me. Every noise, every creak, every whisper sent my mind spiraling into a frenzy of doubt and terror. And then, at 3:17 a.m., I heard the footsteps again. Only this time, they were not coming from the stairs. They were coming from inside the walls. The unmistakable sound of footsteps, but they weren't walking on the floor. They were moving through the walls, crawling along the space between the beams, between the drywall. It was like something was moving behind the very structure of the house itself. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The house was no longer just a place to live. It had become alive, twisting, shifting, breathing in sync with me. And I knew, with certainty, that it was no longer just the house. It was me. The house was inside me, crawling through my mind, changing my thoughts, distorting everything. And soon, I realized, I would be no different from the shadows that walked through the walls. I would become part of it. There was no escaping it. 54:56. Exhalation, too precise, too calculated. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end, and I felt an icy shiver run through me. It wasn't just the dripping, it was the breathing. It felt wrong, unnatural, as if whatever was on the other side of that door wasn't human at all. I stepped back, heart pounding, my thoughts a blur of fear and confusion. The house was silent now, too quiet. I had to know what was behind the door. I had to face it, whatever it was. Taking a deep breath, I reached for the doorknob, my hand trembling as I turned it. The door creaked open slowly, the yellow light spilling out, casting long shadows across the hallway. The bathroom was still. The sink was dry, the toilet seat down, the shower stall empty, just as it had been every other morning. But the towel, that towel, was there again, hanging over the shower rod, its fabric dark with moisture, still dripping steadily onto the floor below. The same rhythmic dripping, echoing through the stillness. But there was something else now. Something that made my blood run cold. The figure was standing by the sink. It was me. But not me. The version of me in the reflection wasn't the person I knew. It was older, more worn, with eyes that seemed too tired, too empty. Its expression was one of deep resignation, and there was something in the way it stood there that made me feel like I was looking at a ghost of myself. A version of me that had been lost to time or forgotten. The figure in the bathroom didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me through the mirror, the same sad, knowing smile stretching across its face. I stepped back, the room spinning as I struggled to process what I was seeing. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. But the figure didn't disappear. It didn't fade away. It stayed. And as I watched it, I felt the suffocating presence of something ancient, something that had been waiting for me, watching me for far longer than I had been aware. I turned to leave, but then I heard it, whispers, faint but growing louder, coming from all around me. They were voices, distant but unmistakable. It was as if the house itself had begun to speak, to wake up, to draw me in. You can never leave. The words reverberated in my mind, and I spun around, eyes wide, but there was nothing in the room. Just the figure in the mirror, still smiling, still waiting. I stumbled back into the hallway, the breath caught in my throat, the air thick with something I couldn't name. The house felt alive now, its walls pressing in, its floors shifting beneath me as though it were alive, breathing, pulsing with a force that had been hidden for far too long. The whispers grew louder, and I knew, with growing certainty, that they weren't just in my head. They were coming from the house itself. The walls were speaking to me, showing me the truth that I had been too afraid to see. And as I stood there, frozen in the hallway, I realized what had been happening all along. The house, the memories, the strange occurrences, they were all connected. They were part of me. Part of something that had always been here, waiting for me to return, to remember. The truth was more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. I wasn't just living in this house. I was becoming part of it. And I was no longer sure whether I would ever be able to leave. 56:45. What if it wasn't just Sarah's subconscious? What if it was something older, something buried deep within her, manifesting through the house itself? The idea unsettled me more than I cared to admit. If the entity in the bathroom was a projection of her, or worse, an extension of something we weren't meant to remember, then it meant that Sarah wasn't just involved in whatever was happening here. She might be at the center of it, unknowingly drawing whatever force was at work into this space, into our lives. I turned away from the window, my breath catching in my throat. The room around me seemed to shift, the walls pulling in just a little closer, as if they were listening to my thoughts. The weight of the house pressed on me with a new intensity, and for the first time, I questioned if Sarah had always been a part of this, the strange atmosphere, the inexplicable events, the shifting perceptions. Was she the key? Was it her presence that kept this house alive? I needed to understand. But I also needed to know if I was losing my mind. The whispers from the bathroom, the breathing in sync with the dripping water, all of it had to have some explanation. I couldn't let myself fall into the trap of imagining things, but the facts were piling up, and they didn't add up to anything that made sense. 56:59. I made my way downstairs, the floorboards creaking beneath my feet, each step a reminder that the house was watching me, listening. Sarah was at the back door now, her face full of innocence and light, her smile unchanged from the moment I'd seen her from the window. But as she stepped inside, I noticed something that made my stomach churn. A shadow clung to her, just behind her. It was faint, barely perceptible, but unmistakable. It mirrored her every movement, shifting and stretching as if it were part of her, attached to her very being. "Morning," Sarah said brightly, pulling her hair back into a messy ponytail. "Sleep well." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. Her presence felt off, like something was out of sync, though I couldn't place exactly what it was. Instead of answering, I simply nodded, my mind still reeling from the implications of what I had just witnessed. Sarah moved past me toward the kitchen, humming softly under her breath. I watched her go, a cold dread settling in my gut. She seemed perfectly normal, too normal. But in the depths of my mind, I couldn't shake the thought that something wasn't right, that she wasn't fully there, or at least not all of her. 57:24. I took a deep breath and walked over to the bathroom, trying to push down the tightness in my chest. The towel was still dripping, its drops now falling faster, more erratic, almost as if it were responding to my presence. I stepped inside, careful not to touch anything, my eyes scanning the familiar surroundings. The mirror was fogged, but there, in the condensation, I saw it again. A handprint. But this time, it wasn't faint. It was distinct, the fingers spread wide as if pressing against the glass from the inside. The outline was clearer, and the coldness of the bathroom seemed to deepen, wrapping around me like an invisible presence. It wasn't just the house, I realized. It wasn't just some strange anomaly. This was connected to Sarah. To us. The house wasn't the one trapping us, it was the force between us, the thin veil between waking and sleep, memory and oblivion. Something had been waiting for us to notice. Something had been waiting for Sarah to remember. 58:00. I turned quickly, looking over my shoulder, expecting to see her there. But the house was silent, still. There was no sign of her. Only the muffled sound of dripping water and the faint whispering that seemed to grow louder as the seconds passed. And then, the reflection in the mirror shifted again. This time, it wasn't me standing there. It was her. Not Sarah in her present form, but an older version of her, someone I'd never seen before. Her face was gaunt, her hair silver, her expression empty and distant. But her eyes were the same. They locked with mine, and for a moment, I felt as if she were reaching out to me, beckoning me closer. The terror that gripped me wasn't just from the sight of her, but from the recognition. This woman wasn't just a stranger, she was a part of Sarah. A part of the house. A part of me. 58:20. "Help us," the woman whispered, her voice soft and echoing, as though it came from both the past and the future. "Help her remember." The word sent a shock through my body, my pulse quickening, my thoughts scattering. The woman, whoever she was, seemed to be waiting for me to take the next step, to follow the path she had set out for me. But the more I stared at her, the more I realized, this wasn't just about Sarah. This was about me. The house was pulling us both in. 58:43. The red zone. The engine was overheating, but the traffic hadn't budged an inch since I'd first stopped. My hands gripped the steering wheel, fingers white with tension, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. There was no sound except the hum of the engine and the occasional sputter of a passing car on the shoulder. But I couldn't focus on the heat, or the oppressive stillness of the air in the car. What had started as a minor inconvenience was rapidly growing into something worse, something that felt off. I could feel the oppressive weight of the stopped traffic pressing on my mind, forcing the world outside to close in. The red brake lights in front of me blurred into a crimson sea, and my own thoughts felt like they were caught in a spiral, pulled tighter and tighter with every passing minute. I looked at the digital clock again, 23 minutes, still nothing. I should have been irritated. I should have been moving, getting out of here. But instead, I felt frozen, like the stagnant air in the car was filling me with a sense of dread. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a figure standing in the middle of the traffic lane behind me. It wasn't just any figure. It was a person. The same woman I had seen in the photographs, in the reflection, in the house. There she was, standing still in the middle of the road, facing me. Her face was obscured by shadows, but I could tell it was her. I could feel her eyes on me, even though I couldn't see them. I turned back to the windshield, heart hammering, and tried to breathe through the panic that started to rise in my chest. I told myself it couldn't be real. I told myself it was just stress, just my mind spiraling again. But the sight of her, standing perfectly still, unmoving despite the traffic all around her, made my skin crawl. The engine sputtered again, and the temperature gauge climbed higher. I reached for the air conditioning, but it was useless. The air in the car was thick, suffocating, and I could feel my breath growing shallower with each passing second. The woman in the mirror was still there, standing, waiting, just as she had in the house. I tried to turn the car off, but the engine refused. It growled in defiance, struggling against the pressure of the heat. I glanced around, trying to see any exit, any way out of this endless, frozen world. But all I saw was the road stretching out before me, a seemingly endless line of stopped cars and red lights. And then, the woman in the mirror moved. She didn't step forward or walk, she simply appeared beside the car. I turned to the side, my breath catching in my throat as I saw her standing by the window, her face now clearer, her expression unreadable. There was no noise, no sound of footsteps or wind, only the faintest shift in the air, a cold that seemed to seep through the glass. She reached toward the window. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. My mind screamed at me to drive, to leave, but my body remained frozen, my hand stuck to the wheel. The woman's hand touched the window, and I felt a sudden, overwhelming pressure in my chest, as though the very act of her touching the glass was pressing down on my soul. The sound of the clock ticking loudly in the car was the only thing that broke the silence. It was louder now, each second stretching out like an eternity. Time was distorting, becoming an abstract concept that felt more like a prison than a measure of reality. Then, without warning, the brake lights in front of me began to blink, one by one, as if responding to an invisible force. The traffic started to move. But not in a normal way. It was as if the world itself was shifting, slowly, deliberately, with a purpose I couldn't understand. The woman's hand remained on the window, her eyes never leaving mine. And in that moment, I realized something that made my heart stop. She wasn't just watching me. She was guiding me, pulling me into whatever this was, wherever it was leading. The traffic around me began to move, but I wasn't driving. I wasn't even in control anymore. The cars in front of me moved in perfect synchrony, as though following some invisible path laid out before us. I could no longer tell whether I was driving or just being carried along by the force of whatever had ensnared me. I looked back at the woman once more, her expression now one of quiet understanding, and in that instant, I knew. I wasn't driving on this road. I was following it, and whatever it was, whatever force had begun this journey, it wasn't letting me turn back. 60:49. His eyes were wide with shock, as if the very reality around him had shattered with the bottle. He stood frozen for a moment, staring at the empty space where the bottle had exploded, his face pale beneath the intense sunlight. I could hear his breathing now, ragged, like he couldn't quite process what had just happened. I was still sitting there, my hands clutching the steering wheel, unable to move. My mind was scrambling, trying to make sense of what I had just witnessed. But the more I thought about it, the more the scene seemed to slip further out of my grasp. The man, the truck, the bottle, all of it felt wrong, out of place, as though the very laws of physics had been violated. The symbols the glass had formed on the ground kept replaying in my mind. They were too perfect, too deliberate. They weren't just random shards, they had a shape, a pattern. But what did they mean? And why did I feel like they were meant for me? As I sat there, staring at the man in my rearview mirror, something strange happened. He began to back away, slowly at first, as if unsure of what to do. His eyes never left me, but there was a shift in his expression. The rage had vanished, replaced by a strange sort of dread, as if he too now understood that something was horribly wrong. And then, without a word, he turned and retreated to his truck, climbing back into the driver's seat. I watched him through the mirror as he slammed the door and sped off, tires screeching against the pavement. The sound of his truck quickly faded into the distance, leaving only silence behind. But the silence wasn't comforting. It felt more like a void, an emptiness that threatened to swallow everything. I blinked, trying to process the moment. My body felt cold, like a distant part of me was still trapped in that encounter, unable to break free. I turned the key in the ignition, the engine sputtering to life, but the weight of what I had just witnessed clung to me like a dark cloud. I drove forward, unsure of where I was going, unsure of what I was even trying to escape from. The city outside my window looked the same, familiar buildings and streets passing by, but everything felt distorted, like I was seeing it through a lens that warped reality itself. The world I thought I knew felt off, and the further I drove, the more I realized I wasn't just driving through the streets anymore. I was driving through a world that was changing around me, bending to forces I couldn't understand. As I reached a red light, I noticed the man's truck in my rearview mirror again. But this time, it wasn't just behind me. It was right behind me, closer than before. Too close. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, but the truck stayed with me. Its headlights burned into the back of my neck, growing brighter, more intense, as if it were pulling me deeper into whatever reality I had stepped into. I glanced at the rearview mirror again. The man's truck was gone, replaced by a long, endless stretch of highway, a road that seemed to stretch forever, beyond the limits of time and space. The world around me was dissolving. I wasn't just driving anymore. I was being pulled into something larger, something beyond my comprehension. I tried to steer, tried to find a way out, but the road ahead only grew darker, the shadows pressing in closer, wrapping themselves around me. And then, just as I thought I would lose control completely, I saw it. A figure standing in the middle of the road, blocking my path. The figure looked familiar, but I couldn't place them. As I slowed down, the figure stepped aside, but their face was still hidden in the shadows. I couldn't see their eyes, but I felt them, watching me, as if they knew everything, as if they had been waiting for me. And then, they spoke. "You can't escape, Thomas." The words came from everywhere and nowhere at once. They reverberated through my body, my mind, as if they were etched into the very fabric of this world, of all worlds. I tried to drive forward, but the car stalled. The engine cut out, and the world went silent. The figure was gone, but I could still feel the weight of their presence, like a heavy stone pressing down on me. I sat there, staring into the darkness ahead, knowing that whatever this was, whatever had happened to me, there was no going back. The road had already shifted, and now, I was on a path that would lead me further into the unknown, deeper into whatever truth had been hidden from me for so long. And as I sat there, paralyzed by the weight of it all, I realized with a cold, bitter certainty. I was already lost. 62:44. Night, a restless, uneasy sleep filled with fragmented dreams of broken glass, strange symbols, and the cold, calculating presence of the man in the red truck. Each time I closed my eyes, the image of the shattered bottle replayed in my mind, the precise, perfect pattern it had formed as it exploded in midair. The fragments were still embedded in my mind, each sharp shard representing something beyond my understanding, something that defied logic, defied physics. I woke in the morning with a sense of dread that I couldn't shake, the events of the previous day lingering in the edges of my thoughts like a bad taste. The house was quiet, too quiet. The air conditioning had finally stopped working entirely, and I could feel the stifling heat creeping in. I wandered through the house, half-heartedly making breakfast, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. What had I seen? What had happened on that highway? Was I just losing my mind, or had something truly impossible occurred? The rational explanations were slipping away, replaced by a creeping sense that there was something I wasn't seeing, something hidden just beneath the surface of reality, waiting for me to acknowledge it. I picked up my phone, absent-mindedly scrolling through social media and news updates. There were no reports of the incident. No mention of an exploding bottle or any strange traffic disturbances. Everything was normal, as if nothing had happened. The logical part of me told me to let it go, that the lack of evidence meant it hadn't been real, that it was simply a trick of the mind, the heat, or stress. But the other part of me, the part that couldn't forget the fear on the man's face, the perfect pattern of the shattered glass, wasn't convinced. As I sat down at the table with my coffee, I felt the house shift again. The silence was heavier now, pressing against me in ways I couldn't describe. The shadows in the corners seemed deeper, more opaque. My breath caught in my throat as I looked around. The walls, the windows, the furniture, they all seemed to be watching me, waiting for something. I stood up and walked over to the window, pulling the blinds aside to look outside. The familiar view of my backyard was unchanged, but something about the scene seemed wrong. The trees were still, unnaturally still, and the air held an electric tension, as if the world itself was holding its breath. And then I saw it. A figure standing in the corner of the yard, half hidden by the tree line. My heart stopped in my chest as I recognized the outline, the same tall figure I had seen before, the one that had appeared in my rearview mirror, the one I couldn't quite place but knew had been there. I backed away from the window, my pulse racing. Was it real? Was it just another trick of my mind, a hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep? Or had something truly followed me here, something that had crossed over from the impossible world I had glimpsed on the highway? The figure remained motionless in the yard, its face still obscured by the shadows. I didn't want to look again, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. It was as if it were waiting for me to acknowledge it, waiting for me to take the next step. I turned away from the window, heart pounding, my thoughts swirling in chaos. I couldn't stay here anymore. I couldn't let this thing, this presence, continue to invade my life. I had to leave. But leave where? Where could I go where it wouldn't follow me? Where could I go to escape the growing certainty that something had been awakened, something I couldn't explain, something that was far beyond my control? The house felt like a cage now, its walls closing in with every passing minute. I walked quickly to the front door, my fingers trembling as I reached for the handle. But before I could open it, I heard a soft knock, faint but unmistakable, on the door. My heart skipped a beat. I froze. The knock came again, slow and deliberate, echoing in the silence of the house. I didn't want to open the door. I didn't want to see who was standing outside. But I knew, deep down, that I had no choice. Whatever was waiting for me out there, whatever had followed me from the highway, it had found its way here. It was time to face it. 64:47. Myself staring into reflections, my own image distorted and unfamiliar, as though I no longer recognized the person looking back at me. The fractures in my environment weren't just physical anymore, they were psychological, eroding my sense of self, my grip on what was real. Each broken piece of glass, each fracture in the mundane world around me, seemed to be a reflection of my own mind, splintering, cracking under the weight of whatever force had begun to take root in my life. I found myself obsessively checking mirrors, windows, anything reflective, trying to find something that would explain all of this. But what I saw only disturbed me further. My reflection was growing more foreign. The eyes staring back at me no longer looked like my own. The face was familiar, yes, but the expression was colder, more detached. It was as if I were seeing a version of myself that had already gone down a darker path, a version that had lost its way long ago. And the whispers, the voices, continued. Quiet at first, but always present. They weren't my thoughts. They came from somewhere deeper, from a place I couldn't quite reach, and they always spoke in the same cryptic language, like a chant or an incantation. It's all breaking. You can't undo it. You are becoming part of it. The words circled in my head, growing louder with each passing day. Every object around me, the glass, the mirrors, the windows, felt like a trap, a fragile shell I couldn't break free from. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, that I was just losing my mind, but deep down I knew it wasn't that simple. One evening, I reached the breaking point. I was sitting on the couch, my hands trembling as I tried to focus on the television, but the images on the screen refused to make sense. The show I had started watching hours ago was now looping, the same scene repeating over and over. And the sound, it was different. It wasn't the dialogue anymore. It was just noise, just static. I turned off the TV, but the noise didn't stop. It was in the walls now, in the very air around me. The hum of electricity, the creaks of the floorboards, all of it blended together into a cacophony, a symphony of madness that pressed in on me from every angle. I stood up, the floor beneath me unstable, and walked to the bathroom. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to see something, anything that would explain the chaos inside my head. I stared into the mirror, expecting to see that same fractured face, but what I saw this time was different. The reflection wasn't mine. It was Sarah's. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, as the figure in the mirror smiled at me. It wasn't the same smile as before. It was darker, twisted, as if it knew something I didn't. And then the reflection began to speak. You've been here before, it whispered, its voice soft and unsettling. We've been waiting for you. The words echoed in my mind, and I turned away from the mirror, my legs giving out beneath me. I collapsed on the bathroom floor, gasping for air, but the whispers didn't stop. They've always been with you. Watching you. Waiting for you to remember. I couldn't escape. The walls of the bathroom, the house, they were closing in on me. I could feel it now, a presence behind me, in front of me, surrounding me. It wasn't just in the house. It was inside me, in my very thoughts, my very being. I wanted to scream, to break free, but I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The reflection in the mirror wasn't just a trick of light. It was real, and it was connected to everything. I felt something cold brush against my shoulder, and when I turned, Sarah's face was right in front of me. But it wasn't Sarah. Not anymore. Come home, it said, its voice low, familiar, yet twisted. The words didn't sound like an invitation. They sounded like a command. I reached out to touch her, but as my hand made contact, everything around me shattered. The walls, the house, the entire world around me splintered into fragments, pieces of reality tearing apart. And I was falling. Falling into the void. And I knew, deep down, that I wasn't coming back. 66:42. The air around the shattered glass, like a ripple passing through the space where the fragments had exploded. It was faint at first, barely noticeable, but it was there, a shimmer, like heat rising off the road, but more deliberate, more focused. The glass fell in perfect symmetry, but the distortion, like a wave of pressure in the atmosphere, seemed to be pulling the pieces into an unnatural orbit, guiding them into their pattern. I froze, my heart racing as I watched the fragments settle into place on the asphalt, a design that was unmistakably familiar. The same geometric pattern, the same crystal-clear structure I had seen before. This was no coincidence. This was deliberate. The pieces weren't just falling by chance. They were being manipulated. I couldn't breathe. I turned my head to glance at the driver, but he hadn't moved. His expression was blank, vacant, as if he weren't even aware of the glass exploding in midair. His hand was still outstretched, holding the bottle, another bottle. I slammed my foot on the gas pedal, the engine roaring to life as I lurched forward, my car speeding ahead, desperate to put distance between myself and whatever was happening. The man didn't pursue, didn't chase. He remained still, watching me through the rearview mirror, his face as unreadable as before. The traffic had started moving again, but the normal world I had known felt like it was dissolving. The road stretched before me, endless and empty, a corridor of broken realities. I glanced at the rearview mirror again, but the red truck was gone. In its place was nothing but the shimmering heat waves rising from the pavement, the geometric pattern of glass now an indelible mark on my mind, refusing to be erased. I didn't know what to make of it anymore. What was I seeing? Was it real? My mind kept circling back to that pattern, that perfect, impossible design the glass had formed. It felt like a message, something important that I was meant to understand, yet it remained just out of my grasp, slipping through my fingers the more I tried to make sense of it. I drove on autopilot, unable to stop my mind from spiraling. I was caught in a loop, trapped in a reality that no longer seemed stable, no longer seemed real. By the time I reached the outskirts of the city, I was too exhausted to keep my thoughts in order. I found a small coffee shop on the corner of a quiet street and parked. The interior was warm and inviting, a stark contrast to the chaos swirling in my head. I stepped inside, hoping that the simplicity of the moment would ground me, that it would offer some semblance of normalcy. But as I waited for my coffee, the shop's radio hummed softly in the background, and the next song that came on hit me with an unsettling jolt. It was the same song I had heard the day I first saw the man in the red truck. The same melody that had echoed through my head for weeks, filling the empty spaces of my thoughts, like a reminder that I was being watched, that something had followed me into this new life, this new reality. My hands shook as I reached for my coffee, the cup warm against my palm. I couldn't escape it. The pattern, the man, the glass, everything was pulling me back to that moment, to that day on the highway. It wasn't just a coincidence anymore. It was part of something much larger, something that was slowly pulling me under. As I sat down at a small table, I tried to focus, to make sense of the events that had led me here. But the feeling of being trapped, of being caught in something beyond my control, kept growing stronger. I couldn't shake the sensation that I was living in a world that wasn't mine. A world that was being shaped by forces beyond my comprehension. And in that moment, I realized, I wasn't in control anymore. I was just following the pattern. 68:51. I was standing still, my face blank, detached from the emotions that swirled inside me. The cracks in the glass warped my reflection, making it seem like I was being pulled apart, piece by piece, like a puzzle whose pieces were shifting, rearranging, and never quite fitting back together. I stepped back again, my breath shallow as I tried to focus. The crack in the microwave door continued to grow, as if the glass itself was reacting to the chaos inside my mind. The fractured reflections stared back at me, each one a different version of myself, and I couldn't help but wonder, which one was real. I reached out to touch the glass, but the moment my fingers made contact, a shock ran through me, cold, electric, like I had touched something alive. The shards that had splintered across the surface trembled, vibrating with an energy I couldn't understand. And then, for a fleeting moment, one of the reflections, my reflection, smiled. It wasn't the expression I was wearing. It was a smile that wasn't mine, a smile that I hadn't made, and yet, there it was, grinning back at me in the fractured glass. I recoiled in shock, my heart pounding, the room suddenly feeling smaller, like the walls were closing in around me. My own reflection, myself, was becoming a stranger. I turned away from the microwave, desperately trying to shake off the feeling of unease that was tightening around my chest. But the truth had already settled in my mind, heavy and suffocating. Something was changing, not just in my surroundings, but in me. The world felt different now, warped by unseen forces, and I was no longer sure who I was supposed to be. Was I still the person I thought I was? Was my identity being shattered, just like the glass, broken into fragments that didn't quite fit together anymore? I couldn't stay in the kitchen. I needed to leave, to escape the oppressive atmosphere that had settled over me. But as I walked toward the front door, I heard it again, the whisper. This time, it wasn't coming from the man in the red truck. It was coming from inside my own head, from a place I couldn't reach, a voice that seemed to resonate from somewhere deep within me. You're not supposed to be here. The word sent a shiver down my spine, and I froze, my hand hovering just above the door handle. The voice wasn't mine, but it felt like it was speaking to me, from me. It was like a memory, a warning that had been buried for too long, resurfacing now to remind me of something I wasn't ready to face. I stood still for a moment, unsure of whether I should open the door, whether I should leave at all. The house felt like it was pulling me back in, like the very air around me was thick with something I couldn't understand. Then, without warning, I heard the sound of footsteps outside the door. They were slow and deliberate, unmistakably close, but when I peered through the peephole, there was no one there. I opened the door, my pulse racing, but the front porch was empty. There was nothing but the cold, still air of the evening and the faint rustling of leaves in the wind. I stepped outside, looking around in every direction, but there was nothing unusual. No one. The street was quiet, almost too quiet, and for a moment, I wondered if the voice had been in my head. But deep down, I knew it hadn't been. I wasn't alone. I could feel it now, something, or someone, was watching me, waiting for me to make the next move. I could feel the weight of it, the oppressive presence that seemed to grow stronger with every step I took. Turning back to the door, I closed it softly behind me, the chill in the air settling into my bones. Whatever was happening, whatever force had begun to invade my life, I knew now that there was no escape. It was here, inside me, in the house, in the very air I breathed. And there was only one question left: how much longer until I lost myself completely? 71:04. I pulled my hand back, the sudden coldness of the room sending a shiver through me. My reflection continued to shake its head, eyes wide, its mouth moving in a silent warning. A part of me wanted to scream, to demand answers from the reflection, from the fragmented pieces of myself that had been scattered across the glass. But another part of me was terrified of what might happen if I listened. The air felt thicker now, as if something unseen was wrapping itself around me, pressing me closer to the edge. I couldn't breathe properly. The oppressive weight of the house seemed to be closing in, its walls slowly inching inward, and I could feel the tension building, like a storm that had been gathering for far too long. I backed away from the microwave, my heart pounding in my chest. My reflection remained, motioning silently, the warning still etched in its expression. The fragments of glass had stopped moving, but the room itself seemed to be shifting, distorting like the reflections in the shards. I couldn't trust the reflections. I couldn't trust anything. But I could not understand what was happening either. I needed to know. With my pulse racing, I turned and fled the kitchen, running through the house without a clear destination, my mind a whirl of confusion. The hallway stretched endlessly before me, the shadows darker than they should have been, as if they were growing, moving with a will of their own. Every door, every window felt like an entryway to something I didn't understand, something that was waiting for me to open it. I tried to steady my breathing, to calm the frantic thoughts, but it was no use. The house felt alive, aware of me in a way it never had before. Suddenly, the whispers came again, not in my head this time, but from within the walls, the floors, the very air itself. It was like the house was breathing with me, echoing my thoughts back to me, pulling me deeper into whatever was happening. You can't run from yourself. The words echoed in my mind like a mantra, the same voice I had heard earlier. The presence was getting stronger, more insistent. It wasn't just here, in the house, it was in me. The more I tried to understand, the more I realized that the boundaries between the house, the glass, and my own fractured sense of reality were blurring. I stumbled into the living room, my vision swimming as the walls around me seemed to ripple. The furniture, the lamps, even the curtains, everything was distorting, like it was being viewed through a fogged lens. I grabbed onto the arm of the couch for support, but the fabric felt slick, cold to the touch, as if it were no longer real. I glanced at the window, and for a fleeting moment, I saw something outside. A figure standing in the yard, just beyond the glass. But this time, it wasn't a reflection. It wasn't me. It was Sarah. But it wasn't the Sarah I knew. Her face was expressionless, her eyes hollow, almost empty, like she was a shell of the person she had once been. She was standing still, motionless, staring directly at me through the window. The air around her seemed to shimmer, like it wasn't quite solid, like she didn't belong in the space she was occupying. I reached for the window, my hand trembling as I touched the glass. The world outside seemed to distort with the slightest pressure, the figure of Sarah warping and stretching, becoming something other. The longer I looked, the more she shifted, her face melting into something unfamiliar, something monstrous. I pulled my hand away from the window, panic rising in my chest. I couldn't look at her, couldn't look at that thing that had once been my sister. The glass had turned into something else entirely, a barrier between worlds that couldn't be crossed. But Sarah wasn't just outside anymore. She was inside too. And the house had become her domain. The thought gripped me, squeezing my chest with a cold, icy hand. What had happened to Sarah? Had she always been part of this? Was she the reason I had seen the figure in the mirror, the reflection that wasn't mine, the fractured versions of myself scattered across the glass? Was this house just a trap, one that was pulling us both into its never-ending web? I couldn't escape. I couldn't even understand what was happening. I turned back to the kitchen, desperate for clarity, but the space before me was a blur of shifting shapes, the glass from the shattered microwave still floating in my mind. I saw myself in pieces, in fragments, scattered like broken shards of a reality that was slipping away. And then, the whisper came again. This time, it wasn't a warning. It was a command. Stay with us. I wanted to run. I wanted to break free, to wake up from whatever nightmare this had become. But I knew, deep down, that there was nowhere to run. The house was now my prison, and I had become part of the pattern. The glass had cracked, and I was trapped within it. 72:58. As I stuffed them into my bag, the sound of paper folding against itself too loud in the silence of the dimly lit library. The flickering lights above cast long, ghostly shadows across the room, stretching in unnatural ways as if they, too, were trying to escape the weight of the air. I moved quickly, the echoes of my footsteps making me feel like I wasn't alone, like something was watching from between the rows of old bookshelves. As I passed the heavy oak door leading to the basement, I hesitated for a moment. The smell had grown stronger, more pungent now, filling the small space around me. It wasn't just musty old paper anymore. There was something alive about it, something that twisted in the back of my throat, urging me to leave, to walk away from whatever lay ahead. But curiosity drove me forward. I'd been to the restricted section countless times, and although the air was always thick with history, tonight felt different. The shadows seemed to close in on me as I descended the stairs into the basement, the smell now overwhelming, almost suffocating. The shelves in the basement were stacked with ancient tomes and fragile manuscripts, many of them brittle and cracked with age. It was here, in this quiet, forgotten corner of the university, that the most valuable pieces of history were kept, tucked away from the eyes of the unprepared. Dr. Hendricks had entrusted me with this space because of my research, but tonight, it felt more like a tomb than a library. The air was heavier than ever, and with each step, the flickering overhead lights grew dimmer, casting long shadows that seemed to breathe with life. The smell was more intense now, and I found myself gagging slightly, the organic sweetness turning sour in my nose. I walked deeper into the stacks, moving between the towering shelves, my fingers brushing against the spines of ancient books, feeling the weight of history pressing against me. But there was something else beneath the dust, something alive, a pulse, a vibration, as if the books themselves were waiting, holding secrets they were not willing to share. And then I saw it. A book unlike the others. It stood out, not in its appearance, but in its presence. It was placed at the very back of a dark, narrow shelf, nearly hidden by the others, as though it didn't belong. I reached for it without thinking, my fingers brushing the leather cover. The moment I touched it, the ground beneath me seemed to shift, and the faint sound of whispers filled the air. The book hummed in my hands, a low, vibrating sound that matched the rhythm of my heartbeat. I pulled it out, my breath quickening, and opened the first page. The writing was old, its language foreign, but something about it felt familiar, as if I had seen these symbols before in another place, another time. The words seemed to swirl before my eyes, shifting, rearranging themselves in a pattern that echoed the fractals I had seen in the broken glass. The air around me grew colder, and the flickering lights above me sputtered violently, casting the room into brief moments of darkness before returning. I heard it again, the whisper, closer now, almost urgent. You shouldn't have touched it. The voice wasn't mine. It wasn't in the air. It was in my mind. I slammed the book shut, but the whispers didn't stop. They circled in my mind, louder now, more insistent. I backed away from the shelf, but the book seemed to follow me, its presence hanging in the air, a constant weight I couldn't shake. I turned and fled, abandoning my notes, my bag, everything. The air seemed to thicken around me, pushing me forward, and the ground beneath my feet became uneven, as if the basement itself was shifting, pulling me deeper into something that I couldn't understand. I burst through the door of the library and into the hall, gasping for air. But the whispers didn't stop. They followed me, echoing in my mind, growing louder with each step I took. You've opened the door. I didn't stop running. I couldn't. The world around me felt like it was unraveling, like reality was fracturing, like I was being pulled into a new existence, one that didn't follow the same rules as the one I thought I knew. The book wasn't just a book. It was a key, a gateway, and I had opened it. I stumbled out into the cold night air, the whispers still lingering, still growing. And somewhere deep inside, I knew that this was only the beginning. The door had been opened, and now there was no turning back. The pattern was beginning to form. And I was trapped inside it. 75:32. And paper. The books arranged themselves with an eerie precision, as if guided by an invisible hand. Each one found its place in the growing pile, the collection slowly taking shape like an intricate puzzle being assembled without a single human touch. The whisper of leather against paper, the soft rustling of pages, was the only sound now, each book settling into the pattern as if part of some larger design. I stood frozen in place, the reality of what I was witnessing creeping into my consciousness with cold, paralyzing certainty. This wasn't normal. This wasn't some accident or trick of the light. The books were moving on their own, arranging themselves into something purposeful, something that knew what it was doing. The air was thick with the same odd sweet smell I had noticed earlier, a mixture of decay and something else, something organic, but not quite natural. It clung to my skin, made it hard to breathe, as if the room itself was alive, responding to the silent command of the books. And then, just as suddenly as they had begun, the books stopped. The pile in the center of the aisle was perfectly stacked, its height just above my waist. It was a simple mound of hardcovers, but the way they were arranged, each book facing inwards, bound tightly together, as if to form a singular entity, was anything but simple. I took a step closer, my feet heavy as if I were wading through thick air. My hand reached instinctively toward the top book, but as my fingers brushed the spine, a shock ran through me, sharp, electric. It felt as though I had just touched something alive. The book didn't just react, it pulled at me, a magnetic force drawing my hand in. I quickly yanked my fingers away, my heart pounding in my chest. That's when I heard it. A low hum, barely audible at first, but growing louder, pulsing with a rhythmic beat that seemed to sync with my own heart. The sound was coming from the books, from the pile in the center of the aisle. It wasn't mechanical, it wasn't even human. It was deep, resonant, like the sound of 1,000 whispers converging into one voice. The voice seemed to speak through the air, through the vibrations in the room. "You are part of the story now." I recoiled, the voice reverberating in my mind as much as my ears. It wasn't a simple sentence. It was a statement, an undeniable truth that shook me to my core. The books, the pile, the story, it was all connected, all part of something that had been waiting, pulling me in, drawing me to this moment. I turned, my mind scrambling to process what was happening, to make sense of the impossible scene before me. But the room wasn't just filled with the smell of books and dust anymore. The air felt alive, pulsing with something ancient, something that had been hidden for centuries, buried beneath the weight of paper and ink. The whispers returned, louder now, swirling in the space around me. They weren't just voices, they were thoughts, thoughts that belonged to something beyond comprehension, beyond human understanding. The pattern is complete. The words echoed in my mind, and for a moment, I felt as though the very fabric of the library, of the world I knew, was bending, warping, like paper folding in on itself. I could hear the sound of pages turning, as though an invisible hand was leafing through the volumes, pulling at the threads of the story they told. I turned back to the pile of books. One by one, they began to shift again, sliding off the top of the stack and floating back onto the shelves with an unsettling precision. They weren't just returning to their places, they were settling into place, as though the library itself was breathing, organizing itself around me. My pulse quickened, the weight of the room growing unbearable. The realization hit me with cold clarity, I wasn't just a visitor here anymore. I wasn't just someone doing research. I was part of this story. The books weren't just pieces of history. They were alive. And I had stepped into their world, into their narrative. And whatever this was, this force, this pattern, it was only just beginning to unfold. 79:52. Marked for reference. But these weren't my annotations. The handwriting was identical to mine, but the thoughts, the emphasis placed on certain passages, were foreign to me. The lines of text I had underlined held no meaning, as if someone else had sifted through the books, leaving an invisible trail behind them, traces of a life I hadn't lived, actions I hadn't taken. I turned another page in the book, feeling my breath catch in my throat. This wasn't just research anymore. This was something much deeper. Each word in the book felt like it was part of a larger conversation, an ongoing dialogue I hadn't participated in, yet somehow was part of. The last book was the one that broke me. Medieval Illuminations of Northern France. I had seen this book before, tucked away in the archives, one of the most fragile texts in the collection. But it was the checkout card that made me recoil. Not only was it signed with my name, but the dates on the card were recent, dates that matched the ones from the other books. I had never checked this book out. I had never touched it. But there, in my own hand, were the signatures and dates, as if I had known I would need them. I tried to breathe, tried to convince myself this was a simple mistake. But the longer I held the book, the more the weight of it settled in my chest. The pages felt warm, almost alive, like they were pulsing with an energy I couldn't explain. The glow from the fluorescent lights above flickered again, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and writhe in the corner of my vision. I placed the book down gently, as if touching it too firmly might cause it to fall apart. But the weight in my stomach didn't lift. The more I looked at the books, the stack that had built itself in the center of the aisle, the more I realized that it wasn't just the books that were important. It was what they represented. The library was more than a building filled with knowledge. It was a portal, an anchor to something that existed just beyond the veil of reality. And I was being pulled deeper into its web. I backed away slowly, my head spinning, and the air growing colder with each step I took. The whispers in my mind had grown louder, now reaching a fever pitch. They were urging me to turn around, to face the books, to continue the search. But I couldn't. I couldn't keep going down this path, not when I knew what lay ahead. The last of the books settled into place, and the silence returned with a finality that left me breathless. But it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was a silence filled with anticipation, as if the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to make the next move. I turned and fled from the basement, my heart hammering in my chest. The fluorescent lights flickered behind me, casting shadows that followed my every step. I didn't look back. I couldn't. As I reached the top of the stairs, I glanced over my shoulder at the basement door, and for a brief moment, I could have sworn I saw something, or someone, standing at the top of the stairwell, watching me. The faint outline of a figure, blurred and indistinct, but unmistakable in its presence. I didn't stop. I ran out of the building, into the cool night air, as if the very act of leaving the library would keep whatever was inside from following me. But I knew better. Whatever had been awakened in that basement, whatever force had drawn me to those books, wasn't finished with me yet. It was just beginning. 83:59. Books and simply forgotten, buried under the weight of countless assignments and projects. It was plausible, if not comforting, to think that my mind had simply buried the memories, that this strange encounter with the books was just a moment of fatigue, of stress. But as I flipped through the first pages of Medieval Illuminations of Northern France, I felt an inexplicable unease settle into my stomach. The images on the pages seemed too familiar, the content too well-worn in my mind, even though I had never opened this book before. I paused at a page displaying intricate, glowing depictions of medieval religious scenes, the vivid colors and details drawing me in. I'd studied art history extensively, but the precision of these illuminations, it felt as though they were calling to me, urging me to look closer, to understand them. I reached out, almost instinctively, to touch the page. As my finger brushed the surface, the soft hum I had felt earlier in the library pulsed through me again, like an electric current, sharp and unsettling. The page seemed to shimmer, the ink appearing darker in some areas, lighter in others, as though it was alive, as if the paint itself were moving beneath my touch. I jerked my hand back, heart racing. This was ridiculous. It's just a book, I told myself, but the words on the page no longer seemed like simple text. They seemed like a part of a larger story, one I had unknowingly become a part of. The room around me began to feel smaller, the walls pressing in, as though the apartment itself was closing in, folding around me like a book with its pages too tightly pressed together. The whispers from the basement, those fragmented thoughts that had been haunting me, started again, louder this time, pulling my attention away from the book. It felt like they were coming from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. A whisper here, a murmur there. They were my thoughts, yet they didn't belong to me. I flipped through the remaining volumes, each one equally unsettling. The same handwriting filled every checkout card, every margin note, my handwriting, but with details I had never written. The books were all mine, but I had no recollection of borrowing them, no memory of reading them, yet there they were. Books I had never seen before, books that had apparently been checked out in my name, but for months at a time, in locations I had never been. The strange, sweet smell that had followed me from the library seemed to be growing stronger, almost overpowering in my small apartment. It was suffocating, filling the space until I could hardly breathe, my head spinning. I slammed the books shut one by one, but the weight of the presence in the room didn't dissipate. It remained, hovering over me, watching me, like the library itself had reached out to claim me. I couldn't stay here. I needed to leave. I grabbed my jacket, shoved the books into a bag, and rushed out of the apartment. Outside, the streets were empty. The usual hum of city life seemed distant, muffled, as if I were walking through a dream. The cool night air brushed against my skin, but it did nothing to chase away the heavy fog that had settled in my mind. My footsteps echoed in the silence, and as I passed the familiar streets and buildings, I couldn't shake the feeling that the world around me was subtly off. The shadows on the sidewalk stretched too far, the streetlights flickered with an unnatural rhythm, and I could swear that someone, or something, was following me, just out of my peripheral vision. I quickened my pace, but the sensation only grew stronger, more oppressive. I found myself heading toward the campus again, drawn back to the library, to that basement, to those books. I didn't want to go back. But I felt as though I had no choice. There was something I had missed, something that was calling me back, pulling me deeper into this mystery that had become my life. As I approached the university, the familiar outline of the building loomed ahead, but it looked different. The windows were dark, the campus unnervingly silent, like a place that had been abandoned for years. And yet, I knew that wasn't possible. I had been here just hours ago, walking down these same paths. The door to the library was ajar, and I hesitated only for a moment before stepping inside. The building was empty, the shelves lined with books I had spent years studying, but the atmosphere felt wrong. The sweet smell from the basement lingered in the air, and the fluorescent lights above hummed softly, casting long, twisted shadows on the walls. I walked down the familiar hallway, the silence pressing against me, suffocating me. The basement was just ahead. My heart raced as I reached the stairs, and I found myself descending without thinking, pulled by some invisible force. I couldn't stop myself. I had to understand. But when I reached the basement, the room I had been in earlier was completely different. The shelves were empty. The books had vanished. There were no books left at all, just a hollow space, stretching endlessly in front of me, as if everything had been erased. And then I saw it, a single book lying on the floor, just beyond the aisle where the tower had stood. I walked toward it, my heart pounding in my chest, the air growing colder with each step. The book was open, the pages fluttering, as if the wind from some invisible source was turning them. I reached for the book, but before I could touch it, I heard the whisper again, clearer this time. "You shouldn't have come back." The word sent a chill down my spine, but it was too late. I had already crossed the threshold. The game had started, and I was just a piece on the board, pulled into a story I didn't understand. 87:58. Really unsettled me. It wasn't the playful chirping I expected from a parrot, nor the squawk of a bird testing its voice. It was a laugh, deep, almost human, a low chuckle that seemed to echo through the quiet of my apartment. At first, I thought it might have been a trick of the wind, or perhaps the sound had come from somewhere outside. But when I looked around, there he was, Marcus, the African gray parrot, sitting on his perch, watching me with those amber eyes, his head slightly tilted, as if he were waiting for my reaction. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. The sound of his laugh wasn't playful, it wasn't innocent. It was a sound that seemed to belong to someone else, not a bird. And the way his eyes locked onto mine as he let out another soft chuckle made it feel like he knew something I didn't. It was as if he were in on a secret, something much darker than I could fathom. At that moment, I realized something that made my blood run cold. I wasn't just living with Marcus. I was sharing my space with something else, something that wasn't bound by the same rules of reality that governed me. This bird, this parrot, wasn't just mimicking sounds he had picked up from the environment. He was speaking in ways that made it clear he had an understanding that went beyond the usual animal instincts. The first laugh had been unsettling, but the second one was worse. This time, it was accompanied by something more, a low, almost imperceptible hum in the air, a vibration that seemed to come from the walls, from the very fabric of the room. It was as if the laughter had triggered something else, something far larger than just the bird. Marcus hopped to a new perch, his eyes following me as I nervously stepped back. I could feel a presence in the room with me, but it wasn't just Marcus. It was the house, the very space I was in. The silence that had once been comforting now felt like a cage, like the walls were closing in. I reached for my phone, needing to hear another human voice, anything to break the isolation. But when I unlocked the screen, I saw that I had no signal. The words on the screen swirled, distorted, as if they too were losing their form. I turned away from the phone, panic rising. I looked back at Marcus, who was staring intently at me, his gaze not just observant but knowing. I could feel his presence in my mind, as if he were inside me, reading my thoughts, aware of my every move. Then, without warning, the lights flickered and the hum from earlier intensified. It wasn't the sound of a faulty bulb or the usual creaks of an old apartment, it was something more, something that seemed to resonate through my very bones. The temperature in the room dropped, and I could see my breath cloud in front of me. Marcus let out another laugh, this time louder, more distinct, more human. It was then that I realized with growing dread, Marcus wasn't just a bird. He was the manifestation of something else, something far older, far more ancient than any living creature. He wasn't just observing me, he was guiding me, shaping the world around me in ways I couldn't understand. The laughter continued, but now it was joined by another sound, a whisper, a voice I couldn't place, but I could feel it inside my head, clear and sharp, like a needle being pressed against my thoughts. "You are the next chapter," it said. "You are the next story." I didn't know if I was losing my mind or if the world around me was changing in ways I couldn't keep up with. But the more I listened, the more I understood, whatever had drawn me into this spiral, whatever had awakened the books in the library and Marcus in my apartment, wasn't finished with me. It was only just beginning. The room seemed to close in on me as I stood there, frozen, watching Marcus, hearing his laugh, and wondering how much longer I could keep pretending that this was just a strange coincidence. How much longer before whatever was lurking behind these inexplicable events finally consumed me whole. 92:36. Door, the soft whisper of my breath the only sound in the house now. The feathers were scattered at its base, and the unmistakable weight of something beyond the door hung in the air. The attic had always been off limits, a dark, neglected space I rarely visited. But tonight, something was pulling me toward it, something deeper than mere curiosity, something primal, as though the house itself were drawing me in, unwilling to let go. I stood there for a moment, flashlight in hand, unsure whether I should open the door. The silence stretched out, suffocating, broken only by the faint thrum of my heartbeat in my ears. Finally, I reached for the latch and turned it. The door creaked open slowly, as if protesting my intrusion, revealing the attic in its dim, dusty gloom. The air was thick with the smell of old wood and forgotten memories, the kind of mustiness that made it feel as though time itself had stopped here. A lone beam of moonlight filtered through the tiny, cracked window at the far end, casting long shadows that seemed to writhe like living things. I stepped inside, my flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. The space was cluttered with old furniture, boxes stacked haphazardly, and forgotten relics of past tenants. But it was the far corner that caught my attention. There, beneath a pile of tattered blankets and old newspapers, a faint, shimmering light flickered in the dark. I walked toward it, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, but I couldn't stop myself. The trail of feathers led straight to the source of the light. I bent down, pushing aside the blankets to reveal a small, glowing object, a book. It was ancient, its leather cover worn and cracked, but the faint light radiating from it was undeniable. It was the same warm glow I had seen in the basement when the books had moved. The same pull, the same force, as if the book were a beacon, calling me. I reached out, my hand trembling as I touched the cover. The moment my fingers brushed the surface, the house groaned, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the floorboards and up my spine. It was a sound of recognition, of connection, and it shivered through me. The book felt alive in my hands, as though it had been waiting for me. I hesitated for only a moment before I opened it, my breath catching in my throat. The pages were filled with intricate, handwritten symbols, symbols I had seen before, in my dreams, in the margin notes in those 6 books I had checked out. These symbols were etched into the very fabric of my existence, memories I didn't know I had. And then, the whisper came again. "You are part of the story now, Marcus." I dropped the book in shock, the sound of its fall echoing through the silence like a gunshot. The room seemed to tilt, the walls closing in around me as I scrambled back, my heart racing. I couldn't breathe. The whisper was in my mind now, growing louder, consuming my every thought. I looked at the book again, but it wasn't on the floor anymore. It had moved. It was back on the shelf, its pages turning as though it had a mind of its own. And then, the laughter started again. Not from Marcus. From the room itself. The sound filled the attic, bouncing off the walls, coming from every direction, drowning out all other noise. It wasn't a single laugh, but a chorus of them, deep, throaty, sinister, like an orchestra of voices laughing at a joke only they understood. I stumbled backward, my legs giving out beneath me, and I collapsed onto the cold floor. The laughter continued, but this time it wasn't just the sound. It was a presence, something suffocating and oppressive, pressing in on me, pulling me into the darkness. I closed my eyes, hands clutched over my ears, trying to block out the sound. But it only grew louder, more intense, until it felt like my very thoughts were being drowned in it. And then, a voice spoke from the darkness, cold and distant, but unmistakably clear. The story is almost complete. I opened my eyes, my body shaking, my vision blurry from the tears and the overwhelming fear. The attic was empty again, save for the faint glow of the book. But now, as I stared at the empty space, I understood. I had been chosen. Not to study the books. Not to read the story. I was part of it. And I was beginning to realize that I might never be able to leave. The walls were closing in. The laughter was getting closer. The book was waiting for me to remember. And all I could do was listen. 94:44. Looked like old photographs, pinned haphazardly to the peeling wood. But the images weren't normal family photos or snapshots of happy memories. They were unsettling, distorted portraits of figures I didn't recognize, some of them blurred, others with faces obscured by shadow. And there, in the corner of every picture, was a figure that looked like Marcus, his amber eyes watching, his body unnervingly still, his wings spread wide as if he were posed like a deity, an observer, or something far darker. I pulled away from the door, my heart hammering in my chest. The air felt thicker now, charged with an energy I couldn't explain, like the attic itself was alive, pulsing with a strange rhythm. I couldn't tell if the candlelight flickering inside was real or if it was just a trick of my mind, but it felt like an invitation, like the room was waiting for me to step inside. Despite every warning bell going off in my head, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The floorboards creaked under my weight as I moved cautiously toward the center of the room. The flickering candlelight cast grotesque shadows that danced on the walls, making it seem like the photographs themselves were alive, shifting and changing when I wasn't looking directly at them. I walked deeper into the room, my flashlight illuminating the edges of the strange portraits. As I passed one photograph, I froze. The face in the picture wasn't one I didn't recognize anymore. It was me. I didn't remember sitting for this picture, but there I was, standing in the attic, bathed in the same flickering candlelight, my expression unreadable, my eyes dark, as if I had been pulled into the scene unwillingly. I stepped back, the realization hitting me like a slap. How? How could I have been in this photo when I had never been in the attic before tonight? And then, I noticed the other photographs, dozens of them, each one containing images of me. Some showed me in situations I couldn't recall, sitting at a desk, reading in the living room, walking down a street I didn't recognize, but in each, my expression was different. I was smiling in some, appearing nervous in others, but always with that same odd familiarity as if I had been here all along. The attic felt colder now, too cold for the warm light of the candles. The air was thick with an oppressive weight, and as I reached for one of the photographs, my fingers brushed something behind it. I moved the picture aside and found a small, wooden box. It was intricately carved, the edges fraying with age, but the scent of pine still lingered faintly around it. My hands trembled as I picked it up, feeling a strange pull in my chest, like it had been waiting for me. The lid opened with a creak, revealing the contents. Inside was a collection of small objects, tiny trinkets and artifacts. At first glance, they looked like things you might find in an old curiosity shop, a tarnished key, a piece of broken glass, a dried flower, a cracked marble. But as I lifted each one, I felt an overwhelming sense of recognition. These were things I had lost over the years, things I had forgotten. The key was one I had found in a drawer months ago, but had lost after a few days. The broken glass had come from an old vase I used to keep in the living room. The dried flower was from a bouquet I had received on my first date with Sarah. These weren't just ordinary objects. They were pieces of my past, each one connected to a moment I had lived, a time I had forgotten. And in the center of the box was the final object, a small book, bound in worn leather. As I opened it, I saw the same handwriting from the library, the same script that had filled the checkout cards and the margins of the books. It was mine, but it wasn't. The book was filled with my thoughts, my research, but it wasn't from my conscious memory. It was from somewhere deeper, something I had forgotten on purpose. I flipped through the pages quickly, each one detailing events I hadn't experienced consciously but had been a part of all the same. The pages spoke of connections between the books, between the objects in the box, between the photographs and me. And the most chilling entry of all. Marcus is your key, Marcus is your guide. You have forgotten him, but he has never forgotten you. I dropped the book, my heart pounding in my chest. The realization hit me like a wave. Marcus wasn't just the parrot. He was part of this, part of whatever this house, this story was. He wasn't just watching me. He was guiding me, leading me back to something. I turned to leave, but as I stepped toward the door, I heard it, the laughter. Not from Marcus. Not from anything I understood. It was coming from inside me now. My mind reeled with the implications. The house was shifting, pulling me into something I couldn't explain. The attic, the books, the trinkets, they weren't just things. They were pieces of a story. My story. But there was one thing I couldn't shake. What if I wasn't the one telling it? As I stepped out of the attic and back into the hallway, the door behind me slammed shut with a force that rattled the walls. And then the laughter began again. 99:34. Mouth, struggling to be heard at once. The sound was low, sinister, a blending of my own voice with something darker, something far more ancient. I felt the chill creep up my spine, as if the walls of the house were closing in, the air thick with the weight of unspoken secrets. I pulled the cloth tighter, hoping the sound would stop, but the laughter only grew, echoing in my head, reverberating through the very air around me. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the chair I had moved earlier, my mind racing for an explanation that made sense. But there was no rational explanation for what had just happened, not for the mirrors, not for the reflection of myself sitting in the chair, not for the laughter that had followed me from the attic into my very thoughts. I stood frozen in place, staring at Marcus through the cloth, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The feathers that had once looked so normal now seemed to glisten unnaturally, the edges of his wings catching the dim light in a way that made them seem more alive, more aware. His eyes locked with mine, and I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, like he was studying me, probing my thoughts, pulling at the very fabric of my reality. You know, he said softly, his voice not quite mine but eerily similar, it's not the first time you've seen me. The words were cold, calculated, and they sent a wave of ice through my veins. I had never heard him speak like this before, never heard him say something that suggested he knew me in a way that was beyond the surface, beyond the interactions we had shared. I stumbled backwards again, bumping into the wall, my heart racing as I tried to make sense of the chaos unraveling around me. The air was thick with the sense that something was watching, something was waiting, and I couldn't escape it. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch toward me, their shapes flickering, shifting, like they were alive too. The weight of the house was crushing me now, suffocating me with its unnatural presence. Every sound, every movement felt amplified, as if the very walls were closing in, trapping me in a cycle I couldn't break free from. Suddenly, the laughter stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, filling the space with an oppressive weight that made it feel like the room itself was holding its breath. I dared not move, too afraid of what would happen next. From beneath the cloth came a whisper, so soft that I almost missed it. This is just the beginning. I reached for my phone, my hands trembling as I desperately tried to find a connection, to reach out to someone, anyone, who could explain what was happening. But the screen remained blank, and the signal refused to come. I looked back at Marcus. His eyes were no longer amber. They were black, deep and endless, reflecting the darkness around us, swallowing everything in their gaze. I felt myself slipping, the ground beneath me growing softer, like I was being pulled into something deeper, something darker. The house was no longer just a home, it was a maze, a labyrinth of memories and shadows, and I was trapped inside it. "You've already been here before," Marcus whispered, his voice echoing in my mind, "you just haven't remembered yet." I turned to run, but the door wouldn't open. The windows wouldn't budge. The house had locked me in, and there was no way out. The walls closed in around me, and the laughter began again, growing louder, echoing through the very air, filling every inch of the space, until it was all I could hear. "You can't escape the story," Marcus's voice said, clear and cold. "It's already written." And with that, I understood. I wasn't just a part of this house. I was a part of this story. And there was no way to rewrite it. 103:58. Moment my fingers close around the brim, I feel a sudden rush of cold, like a gust of wind sweeping through the room. The smell of tobacco and old spice intensifies, almost choking me. It's as if the air itself is filled with Grandpa's presence, his essence seeping back into the house, filling every crack and corner. The hairs on the back of my neck stand on end, but I tell myself it's just the remnants of the old house, the memories that refuse to fade. But the truth is, something feels wrong. The smell, the hat, it's all too vivid, too real. I set the Panama hat back on the counter, feeling the weight of it like a memory trying to claw its way to the surface. As I straighten up, I hear a soft shuffle behind me, the distinct sound of worn leather slippers dragging across the floor. My heart skips a beat. I turn quickly, but the living room is empty. No Grandpa. Just the empty space where he once sat, just the silence that now feels suffocating. My breath catches in my throat as I look around the room, half expecting to see him standing there, his wrinkled face peering through the dim light, giving me that familiar, disapproving look. But there's nothing. Nothing but the cold air and the increasing weight of the house's memories pressing down on me. I try to shake it off. The house is old. Old houses have their quirks. But as I sit back down on the sofa, I notice the temperature has dropped. It's too cold now, colder than it should be. I look over at the window, expecting to see the usual warmth of the evening sun, but the glass is fogged up, condensation collecting along the edges, though there's no reason for it. The smell of tobacco and aftershave grows even stronger, almost overwhelming, and the room feels thick, like it's suffocating. My mind races, trying to find a reason, a plausible explanation. I reach for my phone, but the signal is gone. The house feels like it's closing in on me. It's just the house, I remind myself again, trying to calm the panic rising in my chest. You're just imagining things. But then, just as I'm about to pull myself together, I hear it, the soft creak of the floorboards above. Not the settling of the house. No, this is something else, slow, deliberate, like someone is walking in the hallway above me. I freeze. The sound of footsteps is unmistakable. Someone's here. Someone's walking around upstairs. My heart races as I glance at the staircase, the hallway now cloaked in shadow. I know I'm alone in the house. I moved in by myself just a few days ago. I stand up, slowly, trying not to make a sound. My feet carry me toward the stairs, but every step feels heavier, as though I'm wading through thick air. The sound of the footsteps grows louder, nearer. I stand at the bottom of the stairs, listening, straining to hear. It's just the house settling, I tell myself again. It's nothing. But then the footsteps stop. Complete silence. And then, I hear his voice. I'm still here. The words are clear, unmistakable, like they're coming from directly behind me. My body freezes, and I don't dare turn around. The voice is old, familiar, but wrong in ways I can't explain. It's Grandpa's voice. But it's not Grandpa. I spin around, my heart pounding in my chest. The room is empty. Nothing but the kitchen and the Panama hat on the counter, still sitting where I left it. But I can feel his presence in the air, thick and suffocating, like it's pressing against me from all sides. I back away from the stairs, my pulse racing, and stumble toward the front door. I can't breathe. The walls feel like they're closing in. The house is alive, but not in any way I understand. He's still here, I think to myself, and the realization hits me like a punch to the stomach. He never left. 107:55. Air is thick with something more than just the musty scent of age and dust, it's something alive, something that feels heavier, denser. The very atmosphere in the room seems to press against me, as if the room itself remembers its former occupant, his presence lingering in the very walls. I step forward, my hand gripping the doorframe, my heart pounding in my chest. The rocking chair by the window creaks slowly as if it's being gently rocked, though no one is sitting in it. The cardigan rests in the chair, just as it always has, but the fabric appears too perfect, too undisturbed, as if waiting for something, or someone, to put it on. Then I notice the photos on the dresser, scattered among the cluttered bottles and glasses. They're not old ones I remember seeing before. These are new, images I don't recognize. They show me, but not as I know myself. In one, I'm standing in front of the house, my face turned away from the camera, but the faint outline of my figure is unmistakable. In another, I'm sitting at the table in the living room, my hands clasped together, staring at something beyond the lens. A chill runs down my spine. These aren't pictures I took. They weren't here before. My eyes dart toward the bed, the sheets twisted as they were on the night Grandpa died, but now, there's something different about the disarray. The blankets seem to shift, as if someone is still lying beneath them. I hear it again, the soft, steady breathing, faint but unmistakable. It's not the breath of someone resting peacefully, it's the uneven, labored rhythm of someone who is struggling to breathe, the kind of breath that comes from exhaustion, from disease. Grandpa. I whisper the name softly, as if speaking too loudly might disturb whatever is in the room with me. But there's no answer, only the creaking of the floorboards beneath me and the low hum of the room itself. The sensation of being watched grows stronger, suffocating, as if something is standing behind me, its presence pressing against my back. I turn slowly, my breath shallow in my chest. The door to the closet is ajar, a sliver of darkness spilling out. I don't remember leaving it open. I don't remember any reason to go inside. But the air in the room is thickening, swirling around me, pushing me toward the door as if it wants me to see what's inside. I take a tentative step forward, my feet hesitant on the worn carpet. The air grows colder with each movement, the chill creeping through the floor and into my bones. I'm close enough now to see the faint outline of something in the closet, something large, something that doesn't quite belong. It's too dark to make out any details, but the shape looms in the corner of my vision, just beyond my reach. The breathing stops. The air grows too still, too heavy. And then, from the closet, I hear a soft rustling sound, like fabric being moved, like someone shifting, trying to hide. I reach for the door, my hand trembling, and pull it open. The closet is empty. But the scent of tobacco and Old Spice is overwhelming now, filling the small space like smoke in a confined room. The cold air rushes out, but the overwhelming presence remains, pressing in, suffocating me with its familiarity. And then, on the floor, I see it. A small, delicate item, just a threadbare ribbon, faded with age, caught in the folds of the carpet. I bend down to touch it, and as my fingers brush the fabric, the room seems to shift. The air feels lighter, the weight lifting just a little, but the eerie sensation that I'm not alone remains. And I understand. This ribbon was a part of Grandpa's life, a piece of his history, but it's mine now. Just like the house. Just like everything here. I'm trapped, but I don't know by what, or why. And the worst part is that I don't think I want to know. The weight of the house, of its memories, its presence, continues to grow, pressing down on me with an intensity that feels like I'm suffocating under the weight of a forgotten life, a life I never lived, yet somehow it's mine. 112:22. When he would call me into the living room to show me something trivial but important to him. The voice is soft, almost too soft, like it's coming from far away, but the familiar warmth in his tone is unmistakable. I stand there, frozen at the doorway, caught between disbelief and something much deeper, recognition. The silence of the room weighs heavily on my shoulders as I try to push the words in my head into some sort of order. This is impossible. Grandpa's dead. He's been dead for months. This voice, this presence in the house, it can't be real. It shouldn't be real. But then, the voice calls again, clearer this time, just below a whisper but still distinct, "Come downstairs, I need you." I find myself moving before I even realize it, drawn by the pull of the voice, the memory of years spent responding to that sound, that need. I step into the hallway, my feet light, despite the pounding in my chest. The house seems quieter now, like it's holding its breath, and I feel a creeping unease that grows with each step I take toward the stairs. The temperature has dropped again, and the air is thick with that smell, tobacco, old age, and something more, something decay. I reach the bottom of the stairs, the same steps I've walked up and down for years, but tonight, they feel different. They feel like they're leading me into something I don't fully understand, something waiting for me at the bottom. The living room is dark, but the light from the kitchen spills into the hallway, faintly illuminating the edges of the furniture. I pause just before I reach the living room doorway. Then, just as I step into the light, I freeze. The room isn't empty. There, sitting in Grandpa's old chair by the window, is a figure. It's not quite him, not quite my grandfather, but the presence is unmistakable. The same posture, the same familiar cardigan draped over the armrest. But there's something wrong about the figure. Its eyes, those eyes, are locked on me, but they aren't Grandpa's eyes. They're dark, deep pools of shadow, with no reflection, no light to them. I can feel them watching me. Watching every move. My breath catches in my throat as the figure slowly tilts its head, the motion stiff, unnatural. A crackling whisper escapes from its throat, "Come closer, it's time to finish what we started." But as I stand there, my legs rooted to the floor, I realize the truth that my mind had been too terrified to admit. This isn't Grandpa. This isn't even close to him. It's something else, something that's been living in this house, in the shadow of the memories, waiting for me to open the door. The floorboards creak behind me, and I know I'm not alone. There's something else in the room with me. Another presence, something that's been hiding, waiting, just like the figure in the chair. I turn quickly, ready to flee, but the door slams shut behind me. The room locks me in, and the figure in the chair starts to move toward me. Its steps are slow, deliberate, the kind of motion a predator makes when it knows its prey is already trapped. I try to run, but the weight of the air, the oppressive energy of the room, holds me in place. I scream for help, but my voice is swallowed by the silence of the house. The last thing I hear before everything fades is Grandpa's voice, distorted, mocking in the darkness. "You've been in this house before, haven't you? You're not getting out this time." 114:21. I stand there, staring at the glowing ember, a deep sense of unease fills me. My mind is working overtime, trying to rationalize what I'm seeing, but every explanation falls short. This isn't possible. The room is still, except for the steady wisp of smoke curling up from the ashtray, and the quiet hum of the television in the background. Yet, I can't shake the feeling that someone is here, someone who shouldn't be. I bend closer to the ashtray, examining it with a growing sense of dread. The cigarette is almost burnt down to its filter, but it wasn't there when I left the room. I know I didn't light it. The idea that Grandpa might have been here, sitting in his chair just a few moments ago, fills me with a sense of both comfort and fear. Could it be possible that he somehow came back? But no. I'm not thinking straight. Grandpa is gone. He's been gone for months. This house is old, and it has a way of playing tricks on the mind. I step back, wiping my hands on my pants, trying to shake off the feeling of being watched. Just then, the temperature in the room shifts. I can feel it, a cool, almost chilling breeze running through the room, despite the lack of open windows. The familiar scent of tobacco and Old Spice seems to have intensified, lingering like a presence. I force myself to move away from the recliner, my eyes still scanning the room, desperately searching for some rational explanation. Then, my gaze lands on the staircase. It's the same staircase that leads to Grandpa's old bedroom, the one I've been avoiding. The one I promised myself I wouldn't go back to. But tonight, something feels different. A strange pull seems to be coming from upstairs, as if the house is calling me. I know I should leave. Every fiber of my being is screaming at me to get out, to drive away from this house and never come back. But the strange warmth in the air, the subtle invitation from the things I thought I'd left behind, keeps me frozen in place. And so, I start up the stairs, my feet heavy with uncertainty. The creaks and groans of the old wood beneath me sound unnaturally loud in the stillness of the house. It's as though the entire place is holding its breath, waiting for me to do something, anything. When I reach the top of the stairs, the hallway stretches out before me, dim and narrow. The light from the living room filters up through the cracks in the door, casting elongated shadows along the walls. Grandpa's bedroom door is ajar, just as it always was. The faintest light flickers from within, making the shadows dance in unsettling patterns. For a moment, I stand there, my hand resting on the doorframe, heart racing. A voice whispers in my mind, urging me to go in. It's not Grandpa's voice this time, but something far more insistent. You need to see this. You need to understand. I can't resist. I step into the room. The air is thick with the scent of tobacco, mixed with the sterile tang of old medicine, the lingering odors of a life spent in this room. The room is as I left it, cluttered, but familiar. The dresser, the bed, the small rocking chair by the window. The faded curtains are drawn tight, blocking out the moonlight, but the room feels alive in a way I can't explain. And then I see it. The chair by the window is rocking. Not slowly, like a draft is making it move, but with purpose. As if someone is sitting in it, gently rocking back and forth, just as Grandpa did when he was still alive. The motion is so deliberate that it sends a shiver down my spine. I step closer to the chair. The sound of the rockers squeaking against the floor is unmistakable, but no one is there. But that's not all. On the small table beside the chair is an old photograph, one I recognize. It's a picture of me, taken on my 18th birthday, with Grandpa standing proudly beside me. I pick it up, my heart racing as I examine it. There's something different about the photo. Not in the image itself, but in the feeling it evokes. It's almost as if the photo is trying to tell me something, something important. I hear the soft rustling of fabric behind me. My breath catches in my throat, and I turn around, expecting to see someone. But the room is empty. The house is still. And yet, I know I'm not alone. You're ready now. The voice, low and familiar, drifts through the room. It's Grandpa's voice, but it's not his. There's something different about it, something wrong, like it's been warped, distorted by time and the house itself. The room darkens, the shadows in the corners stretching toward me, as if they're reaching out. The door behind me slams shut with a deafening crash, and I'm trapped. I can hear Grandpa's voice again, but now it's mixed with something else, something ancient, something terrifying. It's time to join us, my dear. I turn around, my legs shaking, but I'm too late. The walls are closing in. The whispers are getting louder. And then, the laughter begins again. 118:12. That I'm still here, still standing in this house, grappling with memories, reality, and the lingering presence of someone I loved. Whether it's my mind breaking down or the house holding on to something that shouldn't be, it doesn't change the fact that something is here with me. The house feels colder now, quieter, but there's still that sense of waiting. The kind of stillness that hangs in the air like an unspoken question. I glance at the empty chair where Grandpa sat, the indentation on the cushion almost as if he's still there, still present, though I know better than to look for him there. As I prepare for bed, I feel the weight of the house around me. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of wind through the cracks, feels like it's trying to tell me something. Maybe it's the house itself that's never truly empty. Maybe it's always held these memories, these moments, waiting for someone to finally listen. I place Grandpa's hat on the small table by the door, the scent of his cologne still faint but present, and I turn off the lights. The shadows seem to stretch longer in the dark, like they're reaching for me, but I don't let myself look back. I climb into bed, trying to push the questions from my mind, the swirling thoughts about reality and what it means to remember, to forget, to live in a house full of echoes. But as I lie there, the silence deepens. And then I hear it again, the soft, familiar sound of footsteps, moving slowly, deliberately, through the house. I tell myself it's just the house settling, just my mind playing tricks, but deep down, I know better. It's as if the house itself is breathing, still alive with the memories of those who've passed through it, waiting for me to understand something important. Tomorrow, I'll figure it out. But tonight, I let the sound of those footsteps lull me to sleep, just as Grandpa's voice had once done so many years ago. 121:53. Dark stains on the wine barrel, how the light seemed to bend unnaturally around the rusted iron hoops, how something about the symbols on the wood had caught my eye, something familiar, yet impossible to place. I wanted to tell her that the air felt thick with something more than just humidity, that the house itself seemed to be waiting, holding its breath. But I didn't. I simply shook my head, offering her a strained smile. Just thinking. Marie eyed me with suspicion, her hand lingering on my shoulder a moment longer before she pulled away, her gaze flickering back to the room full of mourners. The low murmur of voices carried on, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was alive, breathing around me, watching me. I glanced back up at the barrel, the dark stains seeming to shift as if they were moving just beneath the surface. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just the shadows. There was something moving in those stains. Something crawling through the wood, working its way through the staves. But before I could focus more, Aunt Adeline appeared at my side, her sharp eyes catching mine. "You okay, darling?" she asked, her voice low, almost too low for the occasion, but I could hear the weight behind her words. I nodded, trying to pull myself together, to push the strange sensation of dread away. "Just the heat," I said, my voice a little too sharp. "It's making me see things." She nodded, but her eyes didn't leave me. For a moment, I felt like she was looking straight through me, as if she knew something I didn't. Then she moved off to accept more condolences, her demeanor flawless as ever. But the air seemed heavier now, pressing against my chest, suffocating me. I took a step back, away from the wine barrel, but my eyes kept drifting back to it. The symbols, the stains, the way the wood seemed to shift in the light. The room around me felt like it was spinning, the laughter and conversation becoming a blur, as if the world were distorting. Suddenly, a loud thud sounded from above. It echoed through the parlor like a drumbeat. The room fell silent for a moment, and all eyes turned upward, toward the ceiling. The hum of conversation paused. "Probably just the wind," Aunt Adeline said with a forced smile, but her eyes betrayed her. She, too, had heard it. I wasn't so sure. The sound hadn't come from the wind. It had come from something far heavier, far more deliberate. And it was coming from directly above the wine barrel. Without thinking, I stepped away from the group, moving toward the back of the room, closer to the stairs that led up into the attic. The floor creaked under my feet as I approached the narrow hallway that led to the old wooden door that had been sealed for as long as I could remember. The sound from above came again, a soft, almost rhythmic tapping, like someone was knocking. It was not the wind. My hand hovered over the old brass doorknob. The door hadn't been opened in years, its paint chipped, its surface worn with age. But now, as I stood before it, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was calling me to it. The air felt different here, charged with something I couldn't name. The heat of the day seemed to radiate off the door, though it hadn't been exposed to the sun for hours. And then, as I stood there, the door creaked open. Not by itself, no, I had not touched it, but it opened with a slow, deliberate motion, the hinges groaning as if something inside was urging it to move. I stood frozen in the threshold, my heart racing as I peered into the darkened space beyond. A thick, musty smell hit me, the scent of old, forgotten things. The door opened wide enough for me to glimpse the attic's interior, but it was so dark that I couldn't see anything clearly. And then, just as I stepped closer, the shadowy figure of a person, dressed in a dark robe, stepped into the doorway. They were tall, their features obscured by the heavy hood they wore, but there was no mistaking the figure's intent. The figure didn't move, didn't say a word. But the weight of its presence pressed against me like the entire house was watching, waiting. The air seemed to grow colder, and the noise from the parlor, the murmurs, the clinking of glasses, faded as if they were miles away. All I could hear now was the sound of my own breath, shallow and uneven. The figure remained motionless, and I understood. It wasn't waiting for me to make a move, it was waiting for something else. Something I couldn't explain. I didn't reach for the door. I didn't enter the attic. Instead, I turned on my heel and walked away. I didn't look back. But the weight of the figure, the silent presence, remained with me, following me as I returned to the parlor, as I joined the others, pretending nothing had happened. Pretending the house hadn't shifted. Pretending that whatever I had felt wasn't real. But in my heart, I knew it was. 125:56. Vision blurred, and I could feel the overwhelming sense of dread that had been building in my chest now fully unfurling. The floor beneath me seemed to pulse with an energy that was almost tangible, and the suffocating weight of it pressed on my lungs, making it harder to breathe. The liquid on the floor continued to spread, its unnatural, rhythmic movement drawing every eye in the room. The dark, arterial red liquid swirled and pooled in patterns that looked like sigils, ancient, ominous, and far too deliberate. The scent in the room intensified, now mixed with something coppery, metallic, and distinctly wrong. It was no longer just the scent of old memories, but the thick, cloying smell of decay. Something ancient was awakening in the very bones of the house. The creeping tide of liquid began to coat the floorboards in sickening layers, its sinister march unstoppable, like the house itself was bleeding, oozing something far older than the house itself. Grandmother Celeste's voice rose higher, the French prayer lilting, its rhythm oddly comforting in the face of mounting terror. But her words did nothing to quell the panic creeping into my mind. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to escape, but my feet felt glued to the floor, and I could feel my pulse echoing in my ears, drowning out the sound of the liquid splattering. Then, a horrifying realization hit me. The pool wasn't just spreading. It was reaching. The liquid, with its bizarre motion, seemed to be pulling towards the walls, toward the edges of the room, as if it had a purpose, as if it were alive. The ripples in the liquid moved with a deliberate pattern, weaving themselves into a spiral that began to circle the room's edges. It was as though someone, was directing it, commanding the very elements of the house to obey its will. I could hear a scraping sound, coming from beneath the floorboards now, just beneath the polished wood. The unmistakable sound of claws dragging across the surface, scratching, scraping, drawing closer. My stomach flipped, and I felt my legs tremble with a combination of fear and something darker, guilt. It was as if I had somehow invited this, as if the house had been waiting for me to open the door to whatever was coming. The room seemed to shrink as the liquid spread, the walls closing in, pressing on me from all sides. I tried to move, to escape, but the weight of the moment held me in place, rooted to the spot, my eyes locked on the growing pool of red that began to writhe like a living thing. The liquid began to bubble, the surface breaking as something shifted beneath it, something massive, shifting with a terrible slowness. The very air grew thicker, colder, and I could taste the strange metallic tang of it on my tongue. I watched in horror as the liquid, still expanding, formed into distinct shapes, figures, swirling within the patterns it had made. And then, there was a sound, a low, guttural growl that rumbled through the house like thunder. It came from below, deep within the earth itself. The growl was not human. It was something older, more primal, and it rattled the walls, shaking the very foundation of the house. The growling echoed through the floor, vibrating the entire room, and I knew, that whatever had been locked away in this house for so long had finally come free. I turned to look at the others in the room. Their faces were pale, eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own. No one moved, no one spoke. The only sound was the growing cacophony of the liquid, the movement of the ancient entity beneath the floorboards, and the prayers of my grandmother, whose voice was now trembling with something more than just faith. "Celeste," I heard a voice whisper, though no one had spoken. It was low, guttural, reverberating through the very walls of the room. I looked around, trying to locate the source, but the whisper seemed to come from everywhere. And then I realized. The whisper was coming from within the liquid itself. The red pool, it was speaking. It was forming words, ancient words, from something deep within its depths. The very blood of the house, of the earth itself, was calling out. And I was meant to hear it. Grandmother Celeste's prayer became more urgent as she clutched her rosary, her fingers moving faster, but even her voice was drowned out by the sound of the room breathing in time with the growing liquid. The walls groaned, and the house seemed to settle, adjusting to the terrible weight of what was awakening. This house was never just a house. I realized. It was always something more, something that had been waiting. And now, it was calling me. It had been waiting for me to come back, to witness its resurrection. And the question that lingered in my mind wasn't whether I would survive. It was whether I was meant to. 129:53. Submerged in it, until I was standing in the center of whatever force had taken hold of this house. I could feel the pull, a magnetic attraction, urging me forward. The humming, the deep, resonant singing, seeped into my bones, reverberating through my chest. It wasn't just a sound, it was a feeling, pulling at something primal inside me. I fought it. With every ounce of my will, I pushed against the urge to move, to step into the liquid that seemed to promise something I couldn't fully understand, but desperately wanted. My breath came in shallow gasps, my pulse pounding in my ears. The face in the pool was still smiling, but it wasn't a smile of kindness. It was a grin full of knowing, full of hunger. It knew me. I could see it in the way its eyes gleamed, in the way it watched. It had been waiting for me to make the choice. It wanted me to step forward, to surrender, to become part of the tide of whatever was brewing within the liquid that now stretched across the floor like a dark, insatiable flood. "Stay with me," I heard my grandmother's voice whisper through the chaos. Her words didn't make sense at first. Stay with her. What was she asking me to do? But then I looked into her eyes, those eyes, filled with centuries of wisdom and fear. She was fighting with everything she had, and she was asking me to do the same. I turned to her, feeling her energy pulling at me like a lifeline. She wasn't swaying with the rest of them. She was fighting. The force that had taken hold of the room, of the others, hadn't yet claimed her. She was still herself, her prayers fierce, her body straining against the invisible tide. "Fight it," she whispered, her voice ragged but full of command. "Don't let it take you." The face in the pool sneered, its smile widening. The liquid writhed beneath it, and the singing grew louder, more insistent, pressing against my thoughts, filling my mind with images and whispers I couldn't fully comprehend. It was showing me things, images of lives that could have been, futures that never existed, and promises that seemed so close, yet out of reach. The temptation was unbearable. But then, just as I felt my legs move of their own accord, I remembered her face. I remembered the love, the strength, the woman who had raised me, who had kept her family safe from whatever this was. I remembered that she wasn't going to let this house claim another soul, not while she still had breath in her body. With a sudden jolt, I snapped back to myself. I forced my feet to stay planted, to resist the call of the liquid pooling around me. The air seemed to stiffen as I fought, but I refused to move forward. I dug my heels into the floor, willing my body to stay still. The face in the pool froze, as if it was surprised by my resistance. The singing faltered, and for a moment, everything became unbearably still. The liquid stilled too, as though it had been waiting for my decision. But now, there was hesitation in its movements, a subtle shift in its rhythm. It was losing its hold on me. Grandmother Celeste's voice rang out again, louder this time, more forceful. "Fight," she shouted. "It's not real. None of this is real." The words cut through the thick air like a blade. The sound of the singing faded away entirely, leaving only the steady rhythm of her voice and the crackling tension that hung in the room. The liquid seemed to recoil, the once endless flow slowing and halting, as if it recognized that its time had come to an end. I could feel the pressure in the room lifting, like a heavy weight being lifted from my chest. The faces in the mirrors began to fade, their sharp, malevolent smiles retreating into the darkness, leaving nothing but emptiness behind them. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The room was silent. The pool was still, no longer the chaotic mass it had been moments before. The air returned to its usual heaviness, the oppressive weight lifting. I exhaled, a shaky breath escaping me as I looked around. The room was just a room again, old, dusty, and full of memories. But the sense of dread had lifted. The presence that had haunted this house, that had been living in the walls and floors, seemed to have retreated. The others in the room were frozen still, their faces empty, as though they had no memory of what had just transpired. But I knew what had happened. I knew what we had just witnessed. And the question that lingered in my mind, that would haunt me in the days to come, was whether the house would ever be truly free from whatever had been awakened that night. And if it would find a new soul to claim. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to grow longer, stretching out like fingers reaching for me. I lay still, my mind racing, trying to find any logical explanation, trying to convince myself that the events of the day had been a product of my overactive imagination. But the silence felt wrong. It was too heavy, too thick, pressing down on me from every direction. I tried to close my eyes and force myself to sleep, but the memory of the face in the pool, the terrible grin, kept playing in my mind. The weight of its gaze, the way it knew me, the way it had lingered before disappearing, still hung in the air, an oppressive presence I couldn't shake. I pulled the covers up tighter, trying to block out the chill that was creeping into my bones. That's when I heard it. A low, soft thud from the direction of the attic. The same noise I'd heard before, earlier in the evening when the barrel had begun its strange dripping. I held my breath, straining to listen. It came again, followed by the unmistakable creak of footsteps. I wasn't imagining it. The footsteps moved slowly, methodically, as if someone were pacing in the attic above me. But no one was supposed to be up there. The attic had been sealed off, locked, ever since Aunt Deline had taken over the house. I had heard it was too dangerous to access, the stairs unstable, the beams in danger of collapsing. And yet, there they were again, those footsteps. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, unsure whether to investigate or to flee. But before I could make up my mind, a cold breeze swept through the room. The air turned unnaturally cold, colder than it had been all evening. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Something was wrong. I stood up, trembling, and walked cautiously toward the door. As I reached for the handle, the wind seemed to whip up again, stronger this time, rattling the windows and making the walls groan in protest. And then, a whisper. A soft, almost inaudible voice, coming from somewhere within the house. It was a voice I recognized, but it was wrong. It wasn't the voice of my Aunt Deline, or any of my relatives, it was the voice of someone else, someone I hadn't heard in years. "Don't go upstairs," the voice murmured. I froze, my blood running cold. I knew who it was. It was my grandmother's voice, the same voice she had used in her final days before she passed. The same voice that had echoed in my memory since the day of her funeral. I tried to call out, to respond, but my throat tightened, and no sound came. My feet felt rooted to the spot. I couldn't move. "Don't go upstairs," the voice repeated, this time louder, more insistent. "Stay here with me." The voice was coming from the attic. I knew it, I felt it in my bones. I turned toward the door, about to run, when I caught sight of something in the corner of the room. The barrel. It wasn't the same barrel from the parlor, but there it was, sitting silently at the foot of my bed. And it was wet, dripping with that same thick, red liquid I had seen earlier. It pooled on the floor, spreading outward in a perfect circle, just as it had before. The face appeared in the liquid again, its eyes locking with mine, the smile wider this time, stretching impossibly. The face in the pool had found me again. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest.